Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 113 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be reviewing Season 4 of Game of Thrones, and discussing how George R. R. Martin fans should deal with the prospect of the show spoiling future books in the series. But first up, we've got an interview with George R. R. Martin's former assistant, Ty Franck. He and Daniel Abraham, who we interviewed back in episode 35, write the Expanse series of space adventure novels under the pen name James S. A. Corey. The fourth book, Sibo Burn, is out now. The series is also being adapted for television by the Sci-Fi Channel. And now, here's our interview with Ty Franck. All right, so we're here with Ty Franck. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so your new book is called Sibo Burn, and it's the fourth book in the Expanse series, which is based on a pen and paper role-playing game that you created. So first off, why don't you just tell us a bit about how you first got into pen and paper role-playing games?
Well, I don't actually know. I remember playing Red Box D&D in, I think, grade school. That may have been the first one, but it just sort of seems like I've always been doing that. But actually, the Expanse didn't start out as pen and paper. The Expanse actually started out as a pitch for a MMORPG that never went anywhere, and then became a pen and paper game after that because I liked the setting and wanted to see if it worked.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a bit more about the MMORPG project?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot to tell on that one. A friend of mine came to me and asked me if I would help her develop content for an MMO that an ISP was looking to develop. And I had some notes that I'd been playing around with for sort of this near future sci-fi setting. She agreed that would probably work for them. Yeah, the thing you have to know about the MMO stuff is that everybody wants to do fantasy, but World of Warcraft really owns that space. It's almost impossible to compete with them in fantasy. And at the time, Eve was out as a sci-fi setting, but it's a cool game, but it's limited to just the spaceships. And I really wanted a version of Eve or something like Eve where you actually could get off of your ship and have adventures, on the ground. And so that was sort of the initial idea, and then I took this near future setting and sort of built it out to accommodate spaceship and ground-based adventure.
Mm-hmm. And so the different factions that we see in this world kind of came out of the structure of an MMO.
Yeah, it did. We wanted to do different things from World of Warcraft. So of course they have two factions, the Alliance and the Horde. So we had three factions. We had Earth, Mars, and the OPA, and those would have been the factions you started out, your character in.
And what is the OPA?
The Outer Planets Alliance. That's everybody who doesn't live on Earth or Mars.
Mm-hmm. And so why did you decide to go with a near future setting as opposed to a more of a Star Trek, ships faster than light kind of stuff?
Well, two reasons. One, and probably the most important one, is that my favorite book of all time is Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester. I read it when I was 11, which is way too young to read that book. So if you have 11-year-olds, don't let them read that. But it was exactly the right time to sort of rewrite my brain. And I just became obsessed with the idea of this fully populated solar system, which is the setting of that book, with people living on Mars, with people living on the moon, with people living on the various moons of the outer planets. That just stuck in my head and stayed in there for decades. And so when I was coming up with a setting for gaming, that's the thing that bubbled out. And then the other reason is that not a lot of people play in that space. I mean, there are some people doing really good work in that space, but if you compare the number of people working in sort of that faster than light sci-fi setting versus the people who are working in like Star Trek and all that, where you have hyperspace or whatever, it's a much smaller percentage. And very few people were working in the space where you take humans from the pre-FTL, trapped in the solar system kind of setting to the galaxy-spanning empire setting. You almost never see that transition. That's a second act that you almost never see. And I thought that was a really interesting place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you developed all this content for the game. So like, how much material had you come up with, and what happened ultimately with that project?
Well, I actually came up with quite a lot. Almost everything that is the later world building for the pen and paper game that followed and the books came out of that. I sat down and went through all of the various bodies in the solar system, what possible reason people would have for living in those places. There's not a lot of, there's no economic reason to settle our solar system, so let's get that out of the way. There's no reason to do it. But if we were doing it, what would be the things that people would actually use on those various bodies? I did a lot of research on that. And pretty much had mapped out the political situation in that setting, what people were doing on the various bodies, why they lived there, what kind of cultures were springing up. All of that work had been done. And I had Daniel, my writing partner, tells this story that the first time he played in the pen and paper setting, I had this giant 3-ring binder full of notes. And when he found out that those were the notes about the solar system they were gaming in, that's when he decided to ask me to write the book with him, because he hates world building, and I had a giant 3-ring binder filled with world building that we could use. So, yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about that process of how you went from working on an MMO to working to running the pen and paper version.
Yeah. So when the MMO project sort of fell through, it was one of those things where everybody was really excited to do it, but nobody actually had the resources to do it. So even the people who had asked us to work on it clearly didn't understand what they were getting into. And once they did understand what they were getting into, they just sort of backed away slowly, which I totally respect. I mean, a project like that it's like making a Hollywood movie. Making a game that can compete with World of Warcraft. You're looking at tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a project like that. So I understand why once they realized that that's what they signed up for, they sort of backed away. But I had all this material, and I've been a gamer all my life, so computer games and role playing games. So I started play testing the universe with my gaming buddies. Did it work? Were there interesting stories to tell? What kinds of characters would be fun to play in that setting? And not with any real purpose in mind, just because that's something I do for fun. So I started running games in this setting. I came up with a rule system that worked for a pen and paper setting, and started gaming in it.
And so when in this process had you met Daniel? Had you met him prior to starting?
No. I started running games in this setting before I moved to New Mexico. So I met Daniel years later when I moved to New Mexico, and we were in the same writing group together. And he and his wife came over to do some gaming with my wife and I. And yeah, and that was years after I started running games in the setting. Actually, Daniel was late to the game. The first game I ran in this setting in New Mexico was with a completely different group. That gaming group was Melinda Snodgrass and Ian Tergillis and George R. R. Martin, and my wife were all in that other gaming group.
Okay, so how did you get involved with that gaming group?
I just started hanging out with those guys, and they love to game. And Melinda actually asked me, she's like, "So I hear you run a good game. Would you be willing to run a game for us?" So I agreed to do it, and this was the setting I had. And those are all sci-fi people. Melinda used to write for Star Trek, and Ian writes science fiction and fantasy, and George, of course, had written a ton of science fiction before that. So it seemed like a good group to try out a sci-fi game on.
But I mean, so you moved to Albuquerque, and then just how did you initially make contact with all these people out there?
Yeah, we moved to Albuquerque so my wife could do her undergraduate degree at UNM. So that was the initial reason we went there. But I had one friend who lived there, and she was in this writing group. And she went to the writing group and said, "Hey, my friend is moving here, and he's written some stuff. He has this particular writing group. You had to have a professional sale to get in. They would only take people who had professional sales. So she went to them and said, "Hey, he's got a professional sale." So that qualified me to get in, and they met me, and we all got along. So they said, "Sure, yeah, he can start hanging out." And that's how I met everybody, was through that. And then George needed to hire somebody to run his multimedia empire, and Melinda, again, who was sort of at the center of all this, said, "Hey, you should hire this guy." I had actually, before we moved to New Mexico, I had sold out of a financial software consulting company that I helped found. So George had always been hesitant to hire anybody because he didn't want to hire somebody that he had to train. And Melinda's argument was, well, this guy used to run his own consulting company, can probably handle your stuff. So George took a chance and hired me to do that.
Well, that's really amazing. So what's a job interview like when you're going to work for George R. R. Martin?
Actually, it really wasn't an interview because George has never had a real job other than like 2 years he spent as a college professor in like the 70s or early 80s. So it wasn't really an interview. He said, "So Melinda says I should hire you," and I said, "Yes, and here's why," and laid out for him what I could do for him. And then like that the next day I was there at his office setting up his new systems. So it was it was very informal.
Uh, okay, yeah. So you mentioned like what is George R. R. Martin's office like? I heard someone say he has two houses across the street from each other, and one's sort of his office house and one's his home house. Is that true?
It is. I unfortunately I can't talk too much about that because we had talked a lot about it, and based on conversations we'd had in interviews about where his houses, people figured out where he lived. So yes, it is true that he has a couple of houses, one of which is his office, but I can't really talk about where that is or what it looks like because
Okay.
people will figure it out and they start banging on the door.
Yeah, no, I understand. Don't want to do anything to
Yeah.
invade his privacy or anything. But I was also curious. I heard that he writes on like an old DOS computer with WordStar.
Well, he doesn't actually write on an old DOS computer. He did write on an old DOS computer and then it died.
Uh,
So he actually, I built him the computer he writes on now, which is a state-of-the-art machine running DOS and WordStar 4.0. Yes.
and so does it have internet access? Because I heard one of the big advantages of that old computer was it had no internet access, so you couldn't waste
No,
all day on the.
it does not have internet access. He actually has two computers at his desk, one of which is a Windows machine where he does his email and all that. And then the other one is this DOS machine that he actually does his writing on. But he's just got a keyboard toggle to toggle between the two of them. So if he wants to waste time on the internet, he can. But yeah, the real advantage with the DOS machine not being connected to the internet, of course, he cannot possibly get a virus on it.
Yeah, that would be, or he doesn't have to worry about hackers, I guess.
Not on that machine. No, there is a physical firewall in that you have to be sitting at that keyboard to have access to that computer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard you talk about how, I mean, since you worked for George R. R. Martin, people sort of assumed that he was kind of a writing mentor to you and all this stuff, but you've said that that's not actually the case so much.
No. Actually, George, the ways in which George was a really great mentor were on the business side. George has worked in the writing world in TV and in novels and in feature production. He's done that for, 30, 40 years. So on the business side, it was really great to be able to ask him, here's what they're offering. Here's what the contract looks like. I've been invited to do this. What's that going to look like when I get there? He has enormous stories of experience on that stuff. So on that side, he really was a great mentor. But he and I have very different ideas on what constitute good writing. And I'm a big fan of his work, so I'm not saying that I don't think he's good. He's good at it. He is. He's clearly one of the top writers in the field. But how you get to putting words on paper, sort of the pre-production process, he and I work very differently. So there wasn't a lot that we could talk about meaningfully on that side.
Yes, I mean, because he talks in terms of gardeners and architects, and so I guess you're more of an architect?
Actually, I think that distinction is a false distinction. He really loves that idea, but I think it doesn't really actually make any sense. And he and I had several arguments about it, friendly arguments, but we had several arguments about it. And he's actually changed how he describes it now because of our arguments. He no longer talks about it like these are two separate things. He now talks about it, everybody is shades of both. But the truth is, I don't think you can. I think if you have an ending in mind, I don't think you can get there unless you roadmap out how to get there. And he is much more of a sit down at the keyboard, wait for the muse to strike, and bang out whatever chapter is sort of banging around in your head at that time. Um, that works for him. He's able to produce work, so more power to him. But that just seems like a really inefficient way to get a story out. From my perspective, from me as a writer, I could not do that. I have to know where I'm going. I have to know what the next chapters are about, so I can start layering and foreshadowing and all the other stuff that you want to do. He's much more comfortable rewriting chapters over and over and over and over again than I am. For me, a chapter is like a spell in old D&D, where once you've cast that spell, it's not in your memory anymore. So once I've written a chapter, I can't go back and rewrite that chapter. I can edit it, but I can't like completely rewrite it the way he does. We just have very different brains for doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, speaking of your writing, let's go back a little bit now. So you mentioned that you joined this writers group because you had at least one pro sale under your belt. Sort of, how much writing did you do kind of when you were younger, and how did you get to the point where you had the pro sales that qualified you to join this writers group?
Yeah, it's a weird and twisty tale. I never had done a lot of prose writing. I'd done a lot of sort of informal writing for gaming settings and that sort of thing. I liked running games. That was my thing. But I would spend a lot of time writing sort of world building kind of stuff, which is not good prose. You couldn't sell that. But I had done a lot of that sort of writing where, the kind of the Silmarillion type thing, where you're writing the backstory of the world kind of work. And then my sister, she was doing a creative writing class, and she asked me for an idea for a story, and I gave her an idea that had been banging around in my head. And she wrote a story and gave it back to me, and she had done it all wrong. So I wrote my version of it, the version that actually was in my head, and then didn't do anything with it. Just I wrote it and then I had it. But at the time, I was interacting online with some people who were in sort of Scott Card's camp, Orson Scott Card, in Scott's camp, and one of them had worked with him on another project, and I said, hey, I wrote this story, take a look at it, tell me what you think. And I emailed it to her, and she read it, and she wrote back, and she's like, this is great. I'm going to show it to Scott. And I was not sure how I felt about that, but, whatever, that's cool. So he was staying at her house, and she gave him the story that I'd written, and he apparently told her, I'm hearing the secondhand through her, but he apparently told her, this is great, and this person should be writing more stuff. And then later, Scott started running what he called the Writers Boot Camp, which was a 2-week intensive writing course, sort of like a 2-week version of Clarion, with him as the teacher in North Carolina. And it happened to coincide with a time when I had left one job, and I had a non-compete agreement with that company, so they had to give me a giant sack of money when I left. And I wasn't sure what to do, so I said, hey, maybe I'll just not take another job right away. I'll go do this writers boot camp. And my wife was fine with it. She was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. We should do that. So I went and spent 2 weeks in North Carolina doing the writers boot camp. And then, that was the end of that. And then took another job somewhere else. And Scott emailed me and said, hey, I'm starting up this magazine, Intergalactic Medicine Show, and I'd really love to buy that story you brought to the boot camp with you. So I was like, sure, why not? Well, he was paying pro rates, so I got a pro rate sale out of that. And then later he wrote back, he's like, hey, I'm doing a selected stories from Intergalactic Medicine Shows, like the best of kind of thing, and I'd like to buy your story for that too. I was like, okay. So now I had 2 pro sales. Same story, but pro rates both times. And then wrote back later and said, hey, I'd like to do a sample of that for an audiobook, and I'd like to buy your story for the audiobook. So now I had 3 pro sales, all the same story, of course, but every time I was getting pro rates for it. So when I moved to New Mexico, I had more pro sales than some of the other people in the writing group, who'd been writing a lot longer than I had. So that's sort of what got me in the room.
Okay, and so then you joined the writers group and you started doing the pen and paper role playing game, and
Yeah.
you met Daniel Abraham. And so how did that lead to you guys writing books together?
Well, yeah. So he and his wife lived not too far from where my wife and I lived in New Mexico, or in Albuquerque. And when he found out that I was running this game for George and Melinda and those guys, he said, "Hey, would you be willing to run a game for here?" And because that game was up in Santa Fe, which is about an hour's drive, and Daniel and his wife have a young kid, and so it was harder for them to get up there. He's like, "Hey, if you ran a game here in Albuquerque, I would play in it." So I started running a game there, and that's when he saw the binder, and he said, "Have you ever considered writing novels in this setting?" And of course, I hadn't because I'm really lazy. So he said, "Hey, you know what you should do? You should let me write a novel in this setting, and we can split the money." Which is like it's like the opposite version of the gag that every writer hates when people walk up to them at a convention and say, "Hey, I've got a great idea. If you write it, we can split the money." So I actually had a award-winning and well-respected novelist coming to me and saying, "You've got a great idea. I'll write it, and we can split the money." Which he always tells me I'm not allowed to tell that story, but I tell it anyway. So he wrote the first chapter, and again, it was like the thing with my sister writing the story idea. He did it wrong. So I said, "No, this is wrong. I'm going to rewrite it." So I rewrote it the way I wanted it. And he said, "Yeah, no, this is actually great." He's like, "You should just write half the book." So that's how we started. I wrote half and he wrote half, and that's what we've done ever since.
Uh-huh. And so how much work was it taking this world that was originally conceived for games and turning it into the novel format? Like, what sort of adjustments did you have to make to it?
Oh, tons. Yeah. Games are terrible books. And this is something I always have to explain to people at conventions when I'm on panels and things. Don't take your D&D campaign and write it down as a book. It doesn't work. So what you can do is maybe you can take the setting, maybe you can take some of the characters, maybe you can take some of the plot points, but you have to completely redesign the order of events, because in gaming, of course, so much of it is interactive, and so much of it is you sort of, as the game runner, reacting to what your players have done and changing the setting or changing the story to accommodate the actions they've taken. In a novel, which is much more driven by the narrative, you actually have to have a much tighter grip on where the story's going, much more control over how you release information to the reader. It's if you actually read the game I had ran and read the story, you would recognize similarities, but the major plot is very different, and how I feed information to the reader is very different than how I feed information to players. So.
Yeah, I mean, could you give maybe some specific examples from Leviathan Wakes of things that were changed to make that into a novel?
Wow. No, because I did that like 5 years ago.
Okay.
My memories of that are fairly dim at this point. Just a lot of stuff. How the protomolecule manifests on Eros and what the characters do to get away is completely different. That was a much bigger portion of game plot. But in the novel, it's just anytime we tried to keep them on Eros, it just made no sense. So we took what was a huge plot element of the game and just compressed it down to one escape sequence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, and so you guys now, as I mentioned, you've written a bunch of these books. You're on the fourth one. Sibo Burn is the fourth one. So why don't we talk about that? First of all, just what does the title Sibo Burn mean, and how'd you come up with that?
So Cibola is one of the 7 cities of gold that the Spaniards were looking for. So it kind of has that sense of the great treasure that you commit atrocities to find, but doesn't actually exist. The Spaniards burned and murdered their way across Central America looking for this huge payout in gold that didn't actually exist. Yeah, I mean, they stole a bunch of gold from Montezuma, but the Cibola, the city of gold, the city made entirely of gold that they were murdering their way across Central America to find, wasn't real. It was a myth. So the idea of people in history committing great atrocities to find treasures that don't actually exist is one that sort of resonates in that book.
Mm-hmm. And I guess all the titles in the series have some sort of meaning like that. They don't literally refer to things in the book, but they have some.
No, yeah, they're all. Daniel says our titles are designed to let our readers know that we're pretentious, and there is an element of that in there. But yeah, they're all sort of mythological ideas that loosely tie into what we're doing. The first one, the waking up the great monster that's been sleeping is Leviathan Wakes. The second one, Caliban, is the half human, half monster that lives on the same island as Prospero in the Tempest, who resists being controlled, who Prospero attempts to control, and Caliban fights back against being controlled by the wizard. Abaddon in Hebrew mythology, Abaddon is the angel that guards the gates to hell. So that's what we're using there. And then Sibo, of course, is the cities of gold, sort of the treasure that you are willing to commit murder to find that doesn't actually exist.
Mm-hmm. And could you, I mean, I don't know how much you want to say about the actual plot of Sibo Burns, but could you talk maybe just a little bit about how that relates to the events of this book?
Well, we're doing, each book is also us mashing other genres into sci-fi. And the fourth book, we're sort of mashing sci-fi up with our Western. It's our version of the railroad coming through the town, and what do people who are living hand to mouth do to protect themselves when giant corporate interests are just making a land grab. So we're playing with that idea a little bit, and the idea that these worlds that the corporations are spreading out to have this wealth that the corporations want to take, and that people who are not wealthy, people who don't have power, are sitting on top of it, and how do you displace them?
Yeah. Yeah, so the plot of this book, it deals with the first humans to settle on an alien world.
Yes.
And, I think in a lot of science fiction, people don't really think through the implications from biology of what it would be like to enter a completely alien biosphere. And I thought you guys did a really good job with that here. Could you just talk about what some of those alien biology considerations are when you're the first person to set foot on an alien planet?
Yeah, so Daniel has a biology degree, so we do like to play around with the idea of biology, because he's got a background in that. The big one is the thing that always drove both of us crazy is you get to the alien world and then you catch an alien disease, like the Martians getting our diseases in War of the Worlds, and of course H.G. Wells had a much more limited understanding than we do today, but even the idea that aliens would have DNA is totally unfounded. I mean, yeah, that's our version of life stumbled across RNA and DNA as ways to create stable replicators, but those are by no means the only possible version of that. Left-handed and right-handed chirality in proteins. Our version of life has a subset of that. That is by no means the only possible subset life could be based on. A scientist recently did an experiment where instead of potassium, you can use, I believe it was cyanide, as the basis for some of the protein building blocks. And so you could have a life form that one of its primary building blocks is a deadly poison to us. And that should go the other way, too. The things that are essential proteins to our biology could easily be deadly poisons to another biosphere. So you have things like the stinging insects that land on you, sting you, drink your blood, and then fall over dead. Because the things in our blood that are vital to our life are poisonous to them. Or at the very least not nutritious. The idea that we could eat alien life and get nutrition from that is a pretty big stretch. There's a million variations on what life can be built from, and we have a tiny little subset of that. And the idea that our Venn diagram, our circle in the Venn diagram is going to overlap with their circle in the Venn diagram is a pretty big stretch. And how does that look then when you've got two biologies in the same planet that have absolutely no overlap? What does that wind up looking like? We like that idea, playing around with that idea. And of course, in ours, there's actually more biologies than that. I won't get into that because it's spoilers, but just the idea of a whole bunch of different biologies in the same space, none of which can feed off of each other, none of which can, we can interact physically, but biologically we can't interact at all. And then once you do get, because one of the plot points is that people do start getting what appears to be a disease. What is that? Because clearly it can't be a disease. So what looks like a disease and isn't is one of the things we played around with.
So did Daniel know all the science that you guys needed for this book, or did you have to consult any other scientists or experts or anything?
Well, we do, but Daniel's joke is that we aim for Wikipedia level plausibility. We want it to seem plausible, but we never want scientific rigor to get in the way of awesome. So we try to at least not be insultingly implausible for most things. I mean, we probably fail sometimes, but we try not to be insultingly implausible. But most of the research we need to do can be done with, just reading, finding biology texts. And there's a lot of people out there who have done work on, other possible bases for life. There was a guy who was for a while proposing the idea that life could have started out with a crystalline structure and then shifted to DNA, and what would that look like? And just reading that stuff gives you great ideas. And then one of the main things you do is take out all the math so that nobody can double check your work and see all the things you screwed up.
Yeah, and also there's a lot of science in this book in terms of the orbital mechanics and things like that.
Right.
How did you guys figure all that stuff out?
Well, we take out all the math so you can't double check our work. But we're both nerds and we both read a lot about the early space program and the idea of changing orbits and how you change orbits is something that's just sort of at this point part of the sci-fi nerd's lexicon. But if we're having somebody fire a railgun to add more energy to go to a higher orbit, as long as we don't tell you how fast any of that stuff goes or what orbital change they're getting out of it, as long as we leave that kind of vague, it sounds plausible, so it doesn't throw you out of the story. But we make sure not to put any of the math in so that the people who do understand all that don't check our work and point out all the places we did it wrong.
All right, and so you mentioned that before starting these books, you had only published maybe one short story, if I have that right. Have you?
Yeah. Well, one short story that I actually got paid pro rates for.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so you didn't have much experience writing fiction before starting the series, and now obviously you have a ton of experience writing fiction, having written these 4 massive books. Could you just say what some of the biggest lessons you've learned about writing, you've learned over the past couple of years writing the series?
A couple of things that I've learned is chapter length is definitely something you should consider before you start writing. One of the things we learned is that 3,000 word chapters are a fast pace that invites the reader to keep reading, because it seems like most people have the energy to read about 4,000 or 5,000 words in one sitting. And if you do 3,000 word chapters, that means they read a chapter and a half, and most people aren't going to be satisfied reading a chapter and a half. So we get email and tweets all the time from people saying, I stayed up all night reading your book. Well, there's actually structural reasons why our books invite you to stay up all night reading them, some of which is the chapter length. One of the other things I learned is people will think that the solutions to your character's problems are too easy. If you bring a problem up in one chapter and solve it in the same chapter, you can have exactly the same story, but if you bring up the problem in a chapter and then wait till another chapter to resolve it, just by breaking it up across a chapter break, it doesn't seem like it was easy to do. that's not a thing people can teach you. That's not a thing people think about. Writing teachers talk about how to find your voice and how to develop character, and very few people talk about here's what chapter link does for you. So that was cool to start learning that stuff. I actually feel like I'll go off on a tangent for a second, but Michael Caine did a acting video in the 90s where it's like, here's how to be an actor. And the thing that he did that I think is brilliant is he doesn't talk about how to act. He doesn't talk about here's how you find your character's voice and here's what the method is and all that stuff. He doesn't do any of that. His video is about here's how you find your mark every time. Here's how when you are doing a close-up, you can avoid blinking during your close-up. I mean, all this sort of structural stuff that isn't the art of it, but is super vitally important to the craft of it. He did a video on that, and I think that's brilliant. And I actually kind of feel like at this point, I could do a writing class on that. On here's how you structure a chapter so that people will want to keep reading. Here's how here's the writing version of not blinking into the camera on your close-up. That kind of stuff is stuff you don't learn until you actually write books and read reader reactions to them.
So, I mean, do you get a great volume of reader reactions, and do any of those reactions stick out in your mind?
You're going to get some. I mean, our books are pretty popular, and a lot of people read them. So you're going to get people who email you. You're going to get people who tweet at you. You're going to get reviews. Neither Daniel or I are big fans of reading reviews on review sites like Goodreads or on Amazon, because reviews tend not to be helpful. But when somebody writes you an email and says, "Hey, I was a Marine, and this thing that you're having a Marine in your book do doesn't read right to me, and here's why," that's actually really useful stuff. And we do actually listen to that kind of thing, technical sorts of things. Or the other thing is like when somebody writes to you and says, "I really love this character," then that makes you sit and think, okay, what did we do with that character that made somebody fall in love with them? And how can we do more of that with our other characters? So that kind of stuff is a thing you pay attention to.
All right, cool. And so then the other big news, obviously, with this series is that it's being turned into a TV series for the Sci-Fi Channel.
I'm actually at our production offices right now. I'm sitting in the executive producer's office doing this interview. Because he has an office that's quiet.
Okay, well, yeah, so just tell us how that first came about.
Yeah, people always want a story on how we did it, but there isn't one because we didn't actually do anything. We wrote the books, which is pretty much the end of what we did to get this. We wrote the books. Our literary agent has a connection to a Hollywood agent, and passed the books along to the Hollywood agent. And this part happened kind of without us knowing about it. The Hollywood agent went out and took the books out and started getting offers on them. That's pretty easy for if you have a series that's popular at all. It's pretty easy to find option offers because they tend to not be a lot of money, and studios and networks buy a bunch of options and just sort of hold on to them. So he got a bunch of option offers, but what we didn't know is that our Hollywood agent is awesome, and super experienced. He represents Dennis Lehane. He's the guy who took Band of Brothers and The Pacific to HBO. Our agent is. So I mean, he's kind of a high-powered agent. So he got a bunch of lowball option offers and turned them all down without telling us, just because he didn't think it was worth anybody's time. So he just kept turning all these offers down, and what he kept saying is, "I think I can get a lot for these books, and I'm not going to take you seriously," to the people who are making the offers. "I'm not going to take you seriously until you come to me with a production company and a writer already attached." And one of the people who'd been sniffing around the project is the Sean Daniel Company, which is a production company run by Sean Daniel, who used to be a bigwig at Universal, and Sean has personally produced like 200 movies or some crazy number like that. I don't know what the exact number is, but pretty much any movie you mention, Sean will go, "Oh yeah, I produced that." So he has his own independent production company now, and Sean knew Mark and Hawk, Mark Fergus and Hawk Ospey, they had worked together on another project. And Mark and Hawk are the writers of like Iron Man and Children of Men and a lot of high-profile science fiction projects. So Sean took it to them and said, hey, take a look at this and let me know what you think and see if you'd be interested in being attached to this. They read the first book, and apparently they liked it, and they got back to Sean and said, yeah, we totally want to be involved in this. Tell them that we've committed to doing it. So then Sean, his company, came back to us and said, or came back to Brian and said, here's who we have attached. And then Brian and Sean and Mark and Hawk and another guy named Jason Brown who works for Sean, all of us sort of got on a conference call and they said, here's Mark and Hawk. They're committing to writing a pilot for this. Are you willing to give us the option so we can move forward? And then Daniel and I were like, yeah, that sounds great. We love those guys, you know. We're both big fans of the first Iron Man. We thought it was a perfect blend of like sci-fi and action and humor. And we didn't want somebody who would be humorless about this. So we're like, yeah, people who can be funny, that sounds great. We want those guys. So they went off and they wrote a pilot and then took that pilot to Alcon Entertainment, which is a big movie production company that's starting a TV division. So we were like the first project that Alcon was doing as a TV project. Alcon took it to a bunch of networks. There was a bidding war, apparently. I was not involved in that piece, but I have heard that there was a bidding war. And Sci-Fi was the one who put the most poker chips to the middle of the table, apparently. And so that's who we're doing. It's a joint Alcon TV and Sci-Fi Channel production, and that's how it happened. So as you can see, Daniel and I did almost nothing. we, through a lot of this process, we were baggage. We did come out when Alcon, or when Sean Daniel Company was pitching the project to the various networks, or the various production companies and networks. Daniel and I did come out. We sat in the room for those sort of, I guess, as show ponies, where they could turn and say, these are the guys who wrote the books. And, you know, we could wave.
It's like a visual aid, sort of.
Like a visual aid, yeah. And then once we got picked up, and Alcon insisted that it was a direct-to-series thing. They weren't going to do a pilot, and Sci-Fi was willing to do a direct-to-series order. So once we got that, then we were invited by the executive producers to come out and join the writer's room and help develop the story for the first season. And we've been asked to write a script for the first season. So yeah, then now we're really, and I actually have, because I of course had figured out what all this stuff should look like years ago. I've been asked to help take point on the production side piece of it. So I'm talking a lot with production designers and concept artists on what things should look like. I've been invited to have a big piece in that, which is really nice, you know, because they don't have to do that. They don't have to let us be involved at all if they don't want to. They just have to mail us checks. But, you know, we've been invited to do a lot of stuff that writers are often not invited to do. So, yeah, it's been pretty cool.
And just to be clear for listeners, you know, often they'll film a pilot, and then depending on whether that's successful, it'll go to series. But this is a deal where the whole first season is definitely being made at this point.
They have purchased the entire first season, yes. So if they don't make it, something catastrophic will happen.
Okay. And how many episodes is it going to be? And is it going to be an adaptation of the first book, I assume, the first season, or?
Yes, it is an adaptation of the series. I'm not actually yet allowed to talk about what portion of the series the first season will cover. But it is from the material in the book series. And it's 10 episodes for the first season. So, and that could change if we go forward. If there's additional seasons, that order could change. But right now it's 10. So.
Okay, and so I'm getting that you can't really say much at all about the content of it, like what changes might be made or anything like that?
Not really supposed to talk about that yet.
Yeah.
That is, so they're developing their marketing plan for this, and they have a process that they do when you release certain information, and how you package that information. And so we have to make sure that we don't step on any of that. So we don't really get to talk about much. We can talk about Mark and Hawk because we love them, and that's already public information. And we can talk about Sean and Jason because that's already public information. We can talk about who the Alcon executives were who bought this, because that's already public information. The Alcon executive who bought it for Alcon is a woman named Sharon Hall, who has been working in TV a long time, and she developed like Breaking Bad. So she's a high power figure in the TV world, and along with a gentleman named Ben Roberts, they are the two executives who bought it for Alcon. So we can mention their names because that's already public information.
I mean, can you talk at all about the process of being in the writing room? Just how often are you? How much time are you there? And like, how many people are there? What does the room look like? What is the? How do you? Is there a whiteboard? I don't know, stuff like that.
I can't talk about it too much. Daniel and I have been here now for, I don't know, like 5 weeks, and we're in the writing room every day for 8 or 9 hours a day. And it started out with Daniel and I and Mark and Hawk and one other gentleman who's an EP on the show whose name hasn't been mentioned yet, so we don't get to mention him. But the 5 of us sat around a table for 2 weeks and just talked about the series and talked about who the characters were and talked about what the later books were going to be about, so that we could start, seeding some of that information in. And then the rest of the writers showed up after that 2 weeks, and we moved to different offices. And now we're actually starting to beat out the episodes and, what happens in the first season and how is that broken up into 10 episodes and what are the things that happen in each of those 10 episodes. And then the end of this, of course, is that people go off and start writing scripts.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any idea at this point when the series will actually be on television?
Next year. Yeah, I don't know when next year, but they're pretty committed to getting it on the air next year. With a 10-episode run, they have a lot of flexibility on when they can start it. It used to be you had to start by a certain point because every show was 22 episodes. And so there was like a certain time of the year where all shows started. That's no longer true. And especially with short-run series like ours, like 10 episodes or 12 episodes, those sorts of series can sort of start whenever the network wants them to start. So, they have some flexibility there, and we don't know exactly when that will be.
Okay, and then the other James S.A. Corey project this year was a Star Wars novel called Honor Among Thieves. You want to tell us a bit about that?
It's a boring story. I know some people at Random House, and they were looking for somebody to write this Han Solo novel. And one of the people at Random House says, "Have you considered James S.A. Corey? He kind of writes stuff that's kind of like Star Wars," or not really, but I guess for those people, anything that's sci-fi is the same. But they were like, "Yeah, you should talk to this guy." So the people at Del Rey contacted us and said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" And at first we weren't. I got to be honest with you. We're kind of hinky on doing a Star Wars novel. But then they said, "Oh, and this novel will be about Han Solo set between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back." And then we're like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, we have to do that, right?" I mean, that's pretty much the coolest character in the series in the coolest period in the series, because it's still got all the sexual tension with Leia, and before the big "I love you" dramatic reveal in Empire, so it's still got all of that tension. We still got the tension of, is Han Solo a hero or not? Is he still a smuggler? He's still struggling with his own sort of feelings on whether or not he's actually a rebel. That's great stuff. You have to write that book. So once they told us which book they were offering us, we had to take it.
So did you always know you were going to use the James S.A. Corey name for that, or did you ever consider using a different pseudonym?
No, they wanted to.
Okay.
James S.A. Corey is a much bigger name than Daniel or I individually. Yeah, he's a much more popular author now than even Daniel is under his own name.
All right, cool. And then, so I don't know, do you have any tips for writing Han Solo?
What Daniel and I did is everybody gave us advice on which books we should read and all that. But the truth is, Del Rey didn't want us to reference much in the expanded universe. They wanted the goal for these books was to be a novel that somebody who has never read any expanded universe books could pick up and enjoy, even if the only exposure they've ever had to Star Wars is the movies. So they didn't want us dragging a lot of backstory from previous expanded universe novels in. They actively told us not to do that. So what we did to research is we had all of the movies on Blu-ray, and we just sat down and watched Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back over and over and over. And mostly what we were looking for is the cadences of language. How does Han Solo talk? How does Leia talk? How do Han Solo and Chewbacca interact? What does that look like? What does it sound like? And just getting to the point where you could say anything in Han Solo voice, where you could say anything in Leia voice. Getting to that point before you start writing, so that when you have to write a Leia line, or you have to write a Luke Skywalker line, or you have to write a Han Solo line, the patterns of their speech are just natural. It's just natural. You're not trying to force it to sound like Han Solo, because I feel like that's a trap. If you try to force it to sound like Han Solo, then the reader kind of can sense that. But if you're just writing whatever as Han Solo and his way of speaking is just already built into your brain, then I think it comes off a little more naturally. So that's what we did. Whether we were successful or not is up to the reader, but that's what we were trying.
So when you're writing Chewbacca, do you say he growled, or do you like spell it out phonetically, or do you say he growled in a way that Han Solo knew he meant this, or?
Yeah, actually, that's what we did. We used descriptive text. You know, or Chewbacca growled, he howled, he barked, that sort of thing, and then just because that's what the movies do. Han Solo's reaction to Chewbacca tells you what Chewbacca said. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to have that sort of movie feel to it, where Chewbacca makes a growl, and then Han said, "It's not my fault." So we know that Chewbacca just blamed him for something bad that just happened. And a lot of the humor in their interactions comes from that, because you can see Chewbacca sort of growling around the ship and grumping around, and then Han's reaction to that, letting you know that Chewbacca is complaining about stuff, is funny. That's funny stuff, and we don't want to lose that. So.
And I heard you say that one thing you noticed rewatching the movies is that Han Solo is always wrong.
That is true. If you rewatch the first two movies, the things that are true about Han Solo is that if he says something is true, it isn't. If he makes a plan, it fails. Every single time. He is never correct about anything in the first two movies, not once. The thing that he's great at, though, is improvising. So you have Han say, we're going to make the jump to light speed, and then he pulls the lever and it doesn't work. But if he says, I still got a few maneuvers up my sleeve, and then like starts yanking on handles, the Millennium Falcon does all these amazing maneuvers to escape, right? That's what Han is great at. Han is great at yanking on levers in the Millennium Falcon and making it do amazing maneuvers to dodge incoming fire. Han is great at like shooting his way past stormtroopers. Like he has a plan, it totally fails, a bunch of stormtroopers show up, and then he and Chewie just run at them shooting, and the stormtroopers run away. That was never the plan. The plan was never, let's just charge the stormtroopers and they'll chicken out and run away. But he does it and it works. And that's what we love about Han. And capturing that in the books was important to us, that we have him be sort of a bumbler when he's making plans, but when he's just improvising, he kicks ass.
Yeah. Well, I've heard a lot of people suggest actually that the original trilogy works so well because of Han Solo, that he's sort of an average guy just trying to do his job, doesn't believe in any of this Jedi crap. And yes. It gives it this grounding in reality. And then when you make everybody a Jedi or president or something in the prequels, you lose that sort of everyman quality that makes the whole thing work.
It's silly. And when everybody's taking it seriously, it comes across as silly. You have to have at least one guy going, come on, this is ridiculous. As long as you have one guy saying that, it takes the curse off of it, to use a writing term. As long as one guy, if you have something really improbable happen in your story, and one person in the story goes, wow, that was really improbable, that's what the reader's thinking. So having a character say it takes the curse off of it. And Han Solo is that guy in the first three movies. He's the guy who's going, this is ridiculous. What are we doing here, right? And because he's saying that, it's okay. When everybody takes it seriously, it's a little... When everyone on screen is taking it seriously, the audience stops taking it seriously. And that is a truth of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just what do you think about the upcoming J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson Star Wars movies?
I have no idea what to think. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the Star Trek reboot, but I recognize that JJ is an extremely talented filmmaker, and his stuff looks gorgeous. Maybe it'll be awesome. I don't know. I'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Hmm. And we understand Han Solo is coming back, so maybe that'll help.
Well, maybe. I heard the Millennium Falcon fell on his leg, so.
All right, cool. So we're just about out of time. You want to just talk about any other new or upcoming projects you have going on?
Don't really have any new. We got this TV show that's coming out next year, so everybody should watch that. Sibo Burn just came out a couple of weeks ago. If you don't have a copy, you should buy that. And we're working on writing the 5th book.
And is there anything you can say about the 5th book? I actually heard you guys say that you're really excited about this one. A lot of plot threads are going to come together.
Yeah, the 5th book is the sort of the axle around which the entire series is revolving. So we get to do a lot of stuff. We've been dropping in hints about stuff in book 5 since book 1. So, and the tentative title for it is Nemesis Games. But other than that, I don't know what else I can really say.
But I heard Daniel say they always change his titles, so.
Well, this one, but they always change his titles, but they tend to keep mine. I don't know why that is. So I'm pretty sure, and we have a pretty good justification for calling it Nemesis Games, and it fits with the structure that they like. They really like a mythological thing has or does something. So Nemesis Games, because we're using Nemesis in the Greek mythology term. Nemesis is a Greek god, or a Greek mythological character, I should say, and so they should like that.
All right, great. Well, I really enjoyed Sibo Burns and really looking forward to Nemesis Games, or whatever they end up calling it.
Whatever they end up calling it, yeah.
And so, Ty, I just really want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Ty Frank for joining us on the show. And for our panel today, we'll be discussing Season 4 of Game of Thrones. And I'm joined today by 3 guest geeks. So first up, we've got my longtime co-host, John Joseph Adams. He's the editor and publisher of Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines, and the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. He's also edited many other anthologies, including the recent books The End Is Nigh, Dead Man's Hand, and Help Fund My Robot Army. So John, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Then next up, we've got Doug Cohen, making his 7th appearance on the show. Together with John, he co-edited the anthology Oz Reimagined, New Tales from the Emerald City and Beyond, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Interzone, Weird Tales, and Space and Time. You can read his reviews of Game of Thrones on his blog at douglascohen.livejournal.com. So Doug, welcome to the show.
7 kingdoms, 7 gods, 7th appearance. Good to be back, Dave.
And then also joining us today is Theresa DelGucci, who you may remember from our panel on Ridley Scott's Prometheus back in episode 63. Her Game of Thrones reviews appear on Tor.com, and her Hannibal reviews appear on Boing Boing. Follow her on Twitter at tdelgucci. So Theresa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back to talk about something that's actually really good.
Yeah. All right. And so, and before we get started, I just want to warn everyone that this will involve spoilers for every episode of Game of Thrones and every volume of A Song of Ice and Fire, so just be aware of that. And also, we previously discussed Season 1 of Game of Thrones back in episodes 35 and 44, and we discussed the most recent book in the series, A Dance with Dragons, back in episode 48, so you might want to go check those out if you missed them. And the reason we're doing this panel today is because we got a request via our Facebook page from listener Anthony James. So Anthony writes, "Do you think Geek's Guide to the Galaxy will do another discussion about Game of Thrones, the show? I got into Song of Ice and Fire because of this podcast, and I enjoyed it when you recapped Season 1 of the show. But you haven't revisited it since, and now with the show covering some of the most exciting events from the books, the last third of Storm of Swords, and touching on/foreshadowing events from Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons, it might be a good time to revisit it." And he goes on to say, "I think it's worth paying attention to which changes are made when it comes to the future of the series. Why? Because the showrunners know how Song of Ice and Fire ends, for one thing. seeing what they chose to leave in might indicate what's actually going to impact the story most later on. So yes, I think the show may lend insight into speculation about the future of the books. When Talisa is slaughtered at the Red Wedding, it most likely quashes the possibility that Jane Westerling carries the heir to Winterfell. I also think that it's becoming clear that with Martin's glacial writing pace, the show will move past the books. That means that book purists will either somehow need to dodge spoilers for the next few years, or just accept that certain revelations, Jon's parentage, Dany's march on Westeros, Bran's fate, the nature of the others, the ghost in Winterfell, whether Aegon is real, whether Varys Horns will actually do anything, etc., are going to come from the show. And we're going to talk about all that kind of stuff today. And when we've previously talked about Song of Ice and Fire, Jon and Doug and I have all gone into some detail about how we got into the books and what big fans we are and so on. But we've never heard from Theresa on this. So the first thing I want to talk about is just, Theresa, could you just tell us sort of how you discovered Song of Ice and Fire, how many times you've read the books, that kind of thing?
Hey, Sean Bean. I'm a really big Sean Bean fan. I had read the books, before the TV series premiered. I actually met George through my job. We worked in the booth at Comic-Con together, and I had no idea that I was, spending a couple of hours in the booth with, such a great writer. I had no idea. And not a lot of fans came up and spoke to us either at the time, so I really didn't know. But then when HBO decided to make the series and Sean Bean was starring in it, and I loved him so much in Lord of the Rings and the Sharp series, I decided, all right, I got a free copy of the book through a Comic-Con giveaway, gave it a shot, and I could not put it down. I don't normally read epic fantasy. I don't read Wheel of Time. I don't, Name of the Wind, stuff like that. I don't normally. I like horror. I like science fiction more. But something about this family drama just pulled me in right from the first chapter. It was right time, right place. I was in the right mood to read it, and I couldn't put down the series. I read books 1 through 3, one right after the other. Took a little break, for 2 weeks, kind of bracing myself. Everyone told me Feast for Crows was not, so great. So I came back with lowered expectations, and I ended up still really liking Feast for Crows because my expectations were already low. I had already been told, Jon, Dany weren't in it. And I really liked the Greyjoys. They're badass pirates who worship Cthulhu. That really spoke to me as like a horror fan. Like Euron and Victarion were just so evil. I love them. And then by the time I finished, it was only a couple of months until A Dance with Dragons came out. So I've only read the first 3 books twice, but I've read Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons only the one time. I've been meaning to go back to them, but the Wikipedia articles have been more helpful when writing my my reviews for Tor.com.
Well, could you say a bit more about sharing a Comic-Con booth with George R. R. Martin, for a couple hours? What did you guys what exactly were the circumstances, and what did you guys talk about?
Gosh, yeah, this would have been when the Ice Dragon came out. I also work for Tor Books, and we published some, middle grade YA books. So he had written the Ice Dragon. We had put it out as a really nice illustrated edition. So this must have been 2007 or so. And, it was 5:00 at night, and Patrick Nielsen Hayden, my coworker, introduced me. He's like, hey, Theresa, this is George. We're going to be in the booth. And, I'd heard some people, of course, working in science fiction publishing. I'd heard about these great books, but I'm like, swords and dragons and stuff. Like I said, I don't read Sword of Truth. I'm the worst Tor employee ever. I've tried reading Eye of the World, could not get into it. So I just hung out in the booth with this very friendly, kind man who we talked about other books that we liked. We talked about, I just watched him interact with fans. Fans kept coming up, not as often as they do now. He did not have a bodyguard. There was no entourage. It was just him and his little suspenders and hat. And people would come up to the booth and say, oh, hey, you're George R. R. Martin. Oh, I really, really love Game of Thrones. That was great. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm working on the next one. I promise. It's even then I got the sense that he just doesn't write very fast, but he does what he wants when he's ready to.
Well, it's funny because we've talked about how John and I were both kind of burned out on epic fantasy, and Song of Ice and Fire got us back into it, and so it's interesting it got you into it as well. But all right, so like as I said in my intro, we haven't talked about the TV show since the end of season 1. So before getting into season 4, I just want to kind of do a quick recap of what you guys thought of seasons 2 and 3. So John, why don't you start us off and tell us just overall impressions of seasons 2 and 3?
Well, I really love the show. And I mean, I'm not as much of a purist as like I know you and Doug are. I think the books are better, but I really like the show. Season 2, I think, had a bit of a dip in quality. I think they made a bunch of deviations from the books for like no apparent reason, and they sort of amped up some of the sort of more graphic elements. Like they made Joffrey, a little bit more awful than he even is in the books, which seems kind of hard to imagine. Because probably mostly because like you're seeing it actually visually on the screen instead of just imagining what's happening, and it's all on screen. And they did a bunch more like stupid just sort of sex related stuff that was like, okay, you're just going overboard here. And the Battle of Blackwater though was amazing. And so it was like all of the missteps in season 2 I thought were worth it just to get to that. And then season 3 and 4, like season 3 I felt like they really got it right back on track, and I really enjoyed season 3 and season 4 as well. But I mean, and like just seeing the Red Wedding in season 3 was like, oh man, it was so good. It was like, and it was funny like seeing all these like videos of like people shooting videos of their friends who hadn't read the books and they knew it was coming, and like just seeing people freak out. And so we actually got to see that a little bit in person as well, because my sister-in-law lives with us and she hadn't read the books. And so when we were watching it, you could just see her like sort of with her hands up by her face, like almost like she was as if she was hiding under a blanket, just like it's just different just seeing it visually. So I thought they did that really well.
Yeah, I definitely agree though that season 2 was weak. As if you go back and listen to our comments on season 1, we were both overall pretty pleased with season 1, and then I ended up reviewing season 2 for Wired.com, and I really had a lot of problems with it. If you just Google David Barker early Wired, you can go read all my all my complaints about it in exhaustive detail. But I don't know, Doug, what do you think about that? Do you feel like the series dipped in quality in season 2?
Oh, without question, that was the weakest season so far. I don't want to, rehash too much of what you guys already said, but I'll give one additional observation is with John's storyline, I thought that had some of the biggest deviations, and I thought his was one of the weakest storylines. And, as we go on, it gets easier to deal with some of these deviations. They're not always for the best, but they were so tight in following the first book with the first season that it became really hard to digest some of these changes in season 2. And additionally, with John's storyline, we met the character of Quarren Halfhand. And in my mind, I've always seen a lot of similarities between Quarren Halfhand and Oberyn Martell, because in the books, both of them are important figures in their respective parts of the continent. And they have very limited page time, but they make very significant impacts in the story, and their deaths make a big impact on the reader for different reasons, but still a big impact on the reader. And in season 4, they captured that perfectly with Oberyn. And, you saw Twitter freaking out. Mm-hmm. You saw some of those compilations for Oberyn's death, just like John was talking about with the Red Wedding. But with Quarren Halfhands, they really missed it with him. He was a weak character. I doubt most of the viewers that watch the show that don't read the books even remember the name Quarren Halfhand, but they're always going to remember the name Oberyn Martell.
Yeah, Halfhand got short shrift.
Right, so that was one thing that really bothered me, because George Martin has this gift for not just bringing like the main characters alive, but the supporting characters or even the tertiary characters. And Quarren Halfhand, it took a lot of skill to make him come alive on the page as much as he did in such a limited time. And, I don't think it was the actor's fault at all. He only could go by the material he had to work with. But the Benioff and Weiss, I guess they wrote most of the episodes that season, so they should shoulder most of the blame for that. And like John, I'll just add, I thought episode 9, Battle of the Blackwater, was amazing, but not a big surprise considering George wrote the script.
Yeah, I'll just say, Doug, that I mean, my biggest concern with the show is it seems to me that they've tried to give all the main ensemble cast equal time, regardless of whether those characters actually have anything to do according to the events of the book. And that means a lot of the other things that are actually more important get short shrift. Like, I don't know, Theresa, do you think, do you agree with that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I do agree. Quarren Halfhand did not, if I didn't read the books, I wouldn't have really felt much more weight from his death. But I thought there were some things in season 2 that they did beautifully. Like, I loved everything at Harrenhal with Arya, Jaqen H'ghar, and Tywin Lannister. I mean,
yeah, that was
that's
good.
equal parts of the writing and, you know, these fantastic actors. Charles Dance is such a great actor. He really changed my perception of Tywin from like a straight villain to really thinking about like his motivation and where he's coming from. And I thought that set up the Red Wedding in season 3 so fantastically, you know, because I found myself liking this man when he was with Arya, even knowing what he was going to do to her family and how messed up that was. And
He brought a lot of charisma to the part.
yeah, you know, and characters, you know, who did get their own point of view chapters in the books, like Davos, to see him come to life, he's played so wonderfully too. I really enjoyed every scene that he was in, and it made Blackwater that much better. And I will say, yes, George wrote the script for that, but Neil Marshall is a fantastic director. He's so good with the action. He really made that episode stand out as well. The cinematography in season 2, I think everything kind of stepped up a little bit more. The costumes were richer, the cinematography, like when they first go to Pike and you meet the Greyjoys, it was gorgeous. It was lush for such a barren landscape to look so beautiful. I thought they were really, I don't know, just showing like what HBO can do. It reminded me of the pageantry of Rome, you know, which was another HBO series I loved.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, you know, that what you were just saying about the Battle of Blackwater reminded me, just in season 4, the episode where they have the battle at the wall, like, oh my God, that one tracking shot that's just like pans around everything and it's just like this one continuous shot. That's fucking amazing.
And that's like the same director. But yeah, I mean, Neil Marshall's a fantastic director, and I always look forward to his episodes. And I think Blackwater was his first episode.
It was.
I can maybe start to begin to forgive him for Doomsday now, but
I kind of like Doomsday.
No.
But I will say I thought season 4 was the weakest season of Game of Thrones.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we get to season 4, let's stick with seasons 2 and 3 for a second. Let's say a couple other good things about seasons 2 and 3. I mean, I liked the Red Wedding, and I think aside from that, the thing I liked the most was where Daenerys unleashes the Unsullied and shows that she speaks Valyrian. I mean, that part just gives me chills.
Yeah, that was really well done.
Yeah, Dracarys, that was as good as the Red Wedding. You know, that was as good as the Lannisters send their regards. You know, it was beautifully done, just so well executed. I think, you know, even knowing that it was coming, just like with the Red Wedding, it's still the way it was filmed was just so greatly done. You know, and I thought there were other really good episodes in season 3 too that were maybe smaller moments. Littlefinger's monologue at the end of The Climb, you know, chaos is a ladder. I thought that was chilling. That was some of like the best acting on the show, you know. So I don't know. I really loved season 3 as well.
Doug, favorite moments?
I mean, the Red Wedding in season 3 obviously was amazing, and it's not a surprise that, you know, we're all enjoying that and referencing that episode so much, not just because of how powerful it was in the books, but as I'm sure you guys know, and as I'm sure most of our listeners know, that, you know, Benioff and Weiss, like the whole time that they were working on Game of Thrones, they were building toward that moment. So, you know, they really unleashed on us in that episode. And it really paid off in spades, I thought. I thought for season 3, like, I knew that they were going to bring Theon back, which was a deviation from the books, because in the books, he gets knocked out basically at the end of book 2, and then you don't see him again until book 5. And I realized that's just not going to work for the viewing audience. So they're going to have to show the torture and, the interactions between Ramsay and Theon. And I was a little worried that they were going to get into too much torture porn, but especially given some of Game of Thrones habits in general. But I thought they actually struck a nice balance, and I was reasonably pleased, where it's like, okay, so you have to create a storyline it exists, but we never read about it. I thought they did a nice job of filling the cracks with Theon in season 3. And just the way they broke him down bit by bit by bit. And then by the time season 4 rolls around and you see this disheveled wreck that he is, Reek, you understand why he's like this because of what they did in season 3. And if they just did what Martin did in the books, which I thought worked just fine, I don't think it would be as effective.
All right, well, I can see there's no escaping talking about season 4. So, all right, so let's just get into it. So, John, overall impression, season 4.
Yeah, so I mean, I liked it a lot. I think it's not quite as good as season 3 for me. I would still stick with thinking that season 2 is the low point, as opposed to Theresa saying season 4 is. But there was a lot of great moments that I really enjoyed seeing brought to life on screen. Of course, the finale when Tyrion kills Tywin and all that was good. Although there was a lot of changes from the books, or a lot of stuff omitted anyway. I was kind of surprised to see. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the other stuff just like seemed to play really well on screen, like the stuff with the Hound and Arya, and I thought it was interesting having that battle between the Hound and Brienne, which I don't think is in the books, right?
No.
Right. So, but I mean, that worked pretty well, and I mean, I didn't mind that deviation. I mean, I don't know, like, I don't know what kind of repercussions it's going to have by having that happen, but but yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. So,
Doug?
Well, I enjoyed season 4 a lot overall. I guess it was about comparable in my mind to season 3. Like John, I was surprised by the Hound and Brienne fighting, big deviation from the books, but it made sense kind of in the end, the way they, jury-rigged it, I guess. And the thing that stuck out in my mind, a big question, is now that they fought in book 4, Brienne visits the Quiet Isle with that brother. And there's a point where they're actually talking about the Hound. And the brother is saying that the Hound is dead, but he's speaking in metaphorical terms. And meanwhile, you see like this big hooded brother who's limping around with a bad leg, and he says nothing. And the brother's dog goes over to him and is immediately wagging his tail and everything because the dog is attracted to the Hound, because that's supposed to be Sandor Clegane. So now I'm wondering, are they going to cross paths again later on? Like Brienne never realizes in the book that that's the Hound. Now, so, what happens now? Are they not going to cross or almost cross paths later on? So that's an interesting wrinkle that they raised by having them fight, although I thought the fight itself was great.
Yeah. I was thinking back to our panel on best sword fighting scenes. I think we probably would have been talking about that one if had we seen it at that time.
Yeah, I would actually I like season 4 certainly better than season 2, I would say. I mean, one thing that's I actually disliked season 2 enough that I stopped watching the show week to week, and for seasons 3 and 4 I just wait until the whole thing was done and then just watch the whole thing, which is actually my preferred method for watching TV shows anyway. But it does make it harder to remember than what happened because the whole thing kind of blurs together.
On the other hand, any stinker episodes sort of, it's easier to forget that they happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, John, you mentioned that there was stuff left out of season 4 from the books. Do people want to, like, what were some of the biggest omissions you think?
Right. I mean, for me, like, I mean, I just, like, me thinking about that whole scene at the end, right before Tyrion kills Tywin, when Jaime confronts him, or Jaime releases him, and then they have that confrontation where Jaime confesses that the truth about Tyrion's first love, and then so there was that. So there's a whole dynamic that's going to be totally missing from the show right now, and that sort of surprised me, because it seemed like very important in the books that would come back around at some point. Whereas like Jaime and Tyrion end their relationship as we know it now on bad terms, very bad terms in the book, but in the show, like Jaime saved him basically, and then goodbye, and so it's like so there would be no bad blood theoretically. So I don't know, it's interesting. That's it seems like a big deviation, although I'm sure Doug is going to have tons and tons of things that were left out. That's just what came first to mind, though.
Well, before we get to the other things, Theresa, what did you think of the whole Shay, Tisha, Tyrion thing?
Well, yeah, I definitely had a lot of conflicting feelings about it. I liked the way they had built up Shay on the show. She seemed to genuinely be in love with Tyrion, and I thought for sure, I was like, I had hoped that when Bronn told Tyrion he put her on a ship to Pentos, that she had actually gone, and what was happening to her in the books would not happen to her here, and that she would be the whore that Tyrion is speaking of. Where do whores go? Because I thought that would have made a lot more sense than him talking about his first wife from however many years ago. That was so not important to the book, and kind of ruined all of Tyrion's chapters in A Dance with Dragons for me, because it made this heretofore really smart, observant character seem kind of desperate and sad, like, oh, I just want to find like the one person who loved me. There are bigger things going on here than your first wife, who, it's Westeros.
There's like dragons and shit.
She's probably dead, dude. Get over it. There's a war coming. There's like ice zombies. Your family's in turmoil. There's war. Get it together. Use your brain. You've been using it so well up until now. So I was relieved that Jaime never brought that up, because I thought it was just plain foolishness. But I was really sad about Shay, because this was the season where they had to make her into sort of a villain in a way. And that didn't ring genuine to me towards how they had been presenting the character before that. She was jealous of Sansa, yes, but she was also protective of Sansa, and kind of watching Tyrion with a, don't mess this girl up. Like, there was an understanding. And then to suddenly have her act like a psycho crazy ex-girlfriend and testify against him. I understand why she had to testify against him, but she did it without any sort of remorse. She's a whore. She doesn't even have any last name. That's how little power she has. She had to testify against him if Cersei and Tywin made her, but she could have felt a little worse about it. And the only thing that was good at the end was they made it seem like Tyrion killed her more out of self-defense and cold-blooded. You've been sleeping with my dad, which is also really messed up, but at least killing her out of self-defense made Tyrion come off a little better than he might have in the book for killing her in cold blood in such a way. So conflicting feelings. I'm just glad like he's not looking for his first wife, as far as we know right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Tyrion is a lot less of a gray sort of character on the show, right? He's much more just clearly like good, but in a terrible situation. Whereas in the books, he kind of feels much more, sort of conflicted, as whether he's good or bad kind of thing.
John just stole my thunder, because I was going to say the exact same thing. But I'll also give another observation about Tyrion in book 5. Theresa was saying how she was so disappointed with, the way he was being portrayed. But the way I looked at it was that it made perfect sense. Because if you go back to the end of book 3, in the space of about 20 minutes, his entire life got turned upside down. He parted badly with his brother, the only family member who ever showed him any kind of love or affection. He strangled the woman he loves to death after finding out that she was sleeping with his father. And while he never got along with his father, Now he killed his father, and now he's on the run, and his only friend in the world, if you want to call it a friend, is Varys. I'd be in a black depression too. So to me, it made a lot of sense because at that point, there was no place for him to go except deeper into his bottle. And it took a while before he could pull himself out of that. He needed a couple of good kicks in the ass.
Actually, speaking of Varys, did Varys actually go with him in the books? Because like at the end of the show, like he gets Tyrion smuggled onto that boat to get him out of Westeros, but then Varys also gets on the boat. Like I don't.
They never explicitly say one way or the other. All we know is at the end of book 3, Varys helps him, get away.
Mm-hmm.
And then book 4, that's one of the big questions. Where's Varys? Where's Varys?
Mm-hmm.
Where's Varys? All of book 5, where's Varys? Where's Varys? Then all of a sudden, last chapter, here's Varys.
Okay.
So, I mean, technically, he could have went to Pentos and come back, and nobody would have been the wiser because he's the spider. Or he could have just stayed in King's Landing the whole time. We'll never know unless George chooses to share that information with us.
Doug, how about what are some of these other big changes you think from season 4 that the season 4 made to the books?
Well, I guess the biggest one, a lot of people were expecting zombie Caitlyn at the end of, this episode, or I should say the season finale. And at this point, she's still not around. Also, the fact that Balin Greyjoy is still alive. If you want to go by the book's chronology, he should have died ages ago. I believe he was the second of the 3 kings to die. Instead, he's going to be the third, and he's still alive. Probably because they need to, stretch out the Greyjoy storyline until they introduce Euron and Victarion.
Oh, do you think they're going to? I don't think they're going to introduce any of those guys.
Really? I think they will.
I think they will. I think, Asha Greyjoy or Yara on the show, that was probably like the lowest point of season 4 for me because she basically just went to go look at Theon and got dissuaded from rescuing her brother by Ramsay Snow and some dogs. And then it's like, yep, he's dead. So I think we're supposed to have that in mind for next season, maybe, so that she could make her claim at the Kingsmoot and being like, oh, well, Balin's son is dead, and so I'm really his heir. I think we'll see the Greyjoys, but I'm a little skeptical about how that and the Sand Snakes are going to work out.
Oh, wait, before we get to that stuff, I want to say about Catelyn. Some people online were alluding to an Entertainment Weekly interview, I think, that kind of made it sound like she's not even going to be in the show.
Oh.
Yeah, they did, but I think she wouldn't be able to say anything. I think if they're going to show her, they're going to have to play it really close to the vest. I wouldn't trust anything that Michelle Fairley says in an interview. Damn you, Michelle Fairley. So
did you guys see what she did on her Instagram?
No, that was Lena Headey.
No, I think it was Michelle.
With the stone heart?
Yeah, wasn't that Michelle?
No, that was Lena Headey. She made, for her Instagram, she made a pile of stones into the shape of a heart, and everyone went nuts on Instagram and Twitter going, oh my God, Lady Stoneheart. No, she just made a heart-shaped pile of rocks while she was bored one day. Because they don't have, I was fine to not see Lady Stoneheart. I thought that was good because she doesn't really, what would she do for all of season 5? Just string up some random phrase, really? She wouldn't have that much to do.
Oh, no, I'm with you. It made sense. And I thought, Arya sailing off, that was a good ending for the season.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of some of these decisions that we're talking about here have to do with the casting and the actors being available for the filming during the course of a season. And so, with Lady Stoneheart not having much to do, like you say, in the next sort of portion of the plot, they're probably going to try to save all of it for whenever they can, actually have it make sense to have it throughout the course of a single season instead of like teasing it in one season and then, having her just pop back, now only to be not be seen for quite a long time. And the same thing with the Greyjoys. I expect whenever they I expect they will get around to it. It's just that they're saving it all so that they can have it make more sense in the coherent storyline over the course of a season rather than stringing it out. Since there's so many other characters they're bouncing around between. It's hard enough to keep track as it is.
I mean, I have to say, I mean, I read something where they were talking about wrapping this up in 7 seasons. And my impression is that they're just going to cut a hell of a lot of characters out of Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons and like wrap this thing up. I mean, like Doug was saying, I think that, they wanted to do the Red Wedding. They wanted to do all these great revelations from the end of Storm of Swords. My impression is that they don't want to like get into the, get too much into Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons where things just, there's like a billion extra characters and all sorts of crazy shit happening. And I think they sort of hit what they consider the climax of the series, and then they want to kind of wrap things up. And so I expect lots and lots of characters going forward, not to just be in the story at all.
I would think
Dark Star. I'd be okay with no Dark Star.
I would think that they have to not cut anything just so that they can string out enough stuff to keep up to, so that George doesn't continue to delay the show being filmed. Like, it's like he's only got the X amount of material. It's like, it's if they, at the rate that George is going, he's, they're not going to have any new material to actually finish doing the show.
No, I don't think that's a consideration at all. I think they're just going to keep plunging ahead, just firing full blast. That's why they like sat down with George and had him basically map everything out about, this is what's happening next. Because they have those kids growing up. They can't like just wait for those kids to.
True.
So
that's why I think season 4 was my least favorite so far. Because technically, it is still as good as previous seasons, but now it's like the seams are starting to show. There's loose threads. Like the whole side jaunt with Brandt being taken captive at Craster's.
I hated that.
I really thought, that would be a good opportunity, because I actually like it when the show deviates from the book a bit, because it does give you new perspectives. And, like we saw with Bran and the Hound, like that was fantastic. And all those extra conversations with Arya and Tywin. So I really thought maybe we'd get one chance. It's like the Starks are living in this like Taylor Swift nightmare of like, we can never, ever get back together. I really thought Bran was going to have just a moment, just like look across the courtyard. There's Jon Snow, something. And it was nothing. It really ended up just being another filler placeholder, have Bran spin his Hodor wheels until they could push him out to the Three-Eyed Crow again, because his storyline was getting too far ahead of everybody else's. So that was disappointing to me.
Yeah, okay, so John, I mean, my prediction is that, the first 4 seasons sort of, pretty much followed the books for the most part, but I predict from here on out they're going to diverge wildly, and the show is going to be headed to like straight for the resolution, and the books are going to, be a much longer project. I don't consider any possibility at this point that the show doesn't pass the books. I see. That's a foregone conclusion in my mind at this point.
I agree.
I'm just hoping by some miracle Winds of Winter hits before the next season. That's not out of the realm of possibility, but I don't expect it to happen.
Right.
I don't know. I work in publishing. I hear rumblings. I would not be surprised if that book didn't come out until, I would say, July 2016. That's going to be my prediction, just because the last book came out in July. This is the Comic-Con season, the convention season, good for author book tours. My prediction. I'm making a prediction.
But for what it's worth, before anyone panics, she doesn't actually work for George's publishing. So.
Right. No, I do not. So I'm just taking a guess.
Yeah, I've given up guessing when George's books will come out, because anytime someone guesses, me, anyone, they're always wrong. I'm just saying it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I don't expect it. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. I didn't put down any money on it.
But yeah, I mean, because the books, I mean, like I said the last time we talked about this, that I don't think there's any chance this is going to be done in 7 books. I would say 8 or 9, minimum at this point.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think it's, I expect the show to be done in a couple of years and the books to not be done for like 10 to 15 years.
I wouldn't be surprised if he wraps it up in 2 books if the kill rate jumps in book 6 as much as I'm expecting it to. Like, he's always killing a lot of characters, but I'm expecting the kill rate for point of view characters to start going up. And if that happens, then the story will start contracting.
It'll just be Rickon. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it actually kind of makes sense for it to be 7 books since there's all the whole 7 thing in the books. So it's like it would be nice thematically if it was 7.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw George's editor said, "Oh, it might be 8," and then they walked that back right away. But I don't think it's gonna, I don't think it's gonna be 7.
Surprised. I agree with David. I think 9. I'd say 8 or 9. I would not be surprised.
I'll go 7, 8.
Okay, but so that I mean that's a very real possibility, right? That the show is going to get ahead of the books. I think we all think that's
I think it's almost a given.
So how were we going to deal with that? As I think we all feel like we would rather read this stuff in the books first, right? So how do we deal with this the show passing the books?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, like I would like to wait for the books, but the reality is, like right now, I don't even really have time to read anything but short fiction and all the stuff that I'm doing for work. So the chances of me actually being able to have time to read it, even when it did come out, is very slim. So I don't know. And the fact is, and the thing is, I watch it with my family, and I watch the TV show with my family. So it's like I'm kind of leaning towards just going ahead and just watching the show. Also because I would hate to have to try to avoid spoilers for however many years.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do? Like just like stay off the internet for 10 years or something?
I have my strategy.
I've been really unlucky. I have had the very last paragraph of the very last page of both A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons spoiled for me.
That's not fair.
While I was starting to read the book, never post anything on Facebook. I had happened, I was excited. I was reading the series for the first time. I'm like, hey, I just started, Storm of Swords today. Awesome. And some person, I'll never figure out if it was malice or stupidity, was just like, oh man, Kat Stark makes a great zombie. I'm just like, what? So I didn't know what the Red Wedding was. I actually thought I had this, no, but that wasn't spoiled for me because I had this thing in my head where I thought, the Red Wedding had to do with that red comet that was over. So I thought, tell me a freaking comet crashes into a battlefield somewhere and like takes out half the book. So I was very still surprised when the Red Wedding happened, but I was not surprised for Lady Stoneheart. In fact, I was like, son of a bitch, she's going to come back as a zombie. And it did lessen the impact of it.
Yeah, that sucks.
With the Dance with Dragons, I was trying to finish the book before Comic-Con. I couldn't, it's really long. And I was on a red-eye flight back, and my coworker was reading it also. And he turns to me about like 20 minutes outside of landing in JFK. And I'm like, all right, I spent all of Comic-Con. I met George. He signed my book. I didn't get spoiled. This is sweet. And my coworker turns to me. He's like half awake. He's like, oh man, can you believe they killed Jon Snow? I'm like, what? And I'm like, Air Marshal? Like, I'm going to kill you. So I'm at this point, spoilers. Yeah, it still doesn't lessen the fun. Like there's the book and that's one experience and it's so much more rich and detailed and different in a way that the show can never be. The show is something else. So I'll just still keep enjoying the show. I am not bothered by like Jojen dying, before he died in the book. Yeah, no, that doesn't bother me. I'm immune.
No, wait a minute. Who is this coworker? Because I need to avoid this person.
Justin Golenbach. You guys know.
Oh my God,
Justin!
I'm calling him out right here. Justin Golenbach knows I will never forgive him.
Shame on you
for doing that. I will never let him know.
But speaking of Jojen, though, I think Doug, do you have some thoughts on this? Maybe.
Oh, for sure. I mean, after that scene, I think it was episode 4. Where at the end you see the White Walker, put his finger on the baby and the baby's eyes change. It basically becomes like a baby White Walker. And when I saw that, I was just like, what the fuck? Because I don't want spoilers for the books at all. And when I saw that, I mean, first of all, I would have just turned off the television, but it was at the end of the episode. I was like a deer in the headlights. I didn't know what was going on. And then afterward, I'm like, well, is it a spoiler? Or are they just completely going off the beaten path? And it was kind of driving me crazy not knowing. I'm like, if that happens again, I have to stop watching the show because I'm a purist. I love the show. It's great to watch, but books first. I don't want stuff from the show ruining the books for me. So normally I would have said after Jojen died, that's it. I am done with the show. The only reason I didn't say that is because I've known for years, 100%, that Jojen is going to die. George slipped all sorts of clues in there where the way I read it, the only logical explanation is that Jojen is going to die. Because in the books, every time he says, the green dreams never lie, his sister would become unreasonably upset. But we never learn why she becomes unreasonably upset. So the only logical conclusion is, well, if we find out why, then we know Jojen's going to die, then it's not a surprise. So I knew he was going to die. And since the scene they killed him in the show already happened in the books, that means they're not even ruining the manner of his death for me because he's going to die in some other way. And maybe he still does something important in the books and they're just going to have Mira do it in the show instead. So nothing really got ruined for me there, but it's gotten to the point where I feel like I dodged a bullet. I can't take any more chances. So starting next year, when there's a new episode each week, I'm not going to watch the episode. I'll wait till the episode is over, at which point I'll ask on my Facebook account, hey guys, can I watch this episode? At which point people will tell me yay or nay. If it's safe, hey, great, I'm all in. If not, then I'm out. And then we start taking some precautions going forward for however many years necessary to avoid spoilers. And I do have some precautions in place because yes, I have given this thought because that's how much I love this damn story. It's like imprinted into my soul.
I mean, I totally agree with you, Doug, that Jojen is going to die for the reasons that you say. But it occurs to me that with a television show, they might kill off characters for reasons completely unrelated to stuff that happens in the book if it doesn't make that much difference, right? Like, so that the actor, like, they killed off Mr. Echo in Lost just because he was a pain in the ass to work with. And, something similar to that might happen. The actor's just not available next year or whatever. And they're just like, we can just do without this character, so let's just kill him now. And that doesn't necessarily mean that character is going to die in the book.
Yeah.
Right, but I can't take that chance.
Although with Game of Thrones, it seems like that they would be probably more likely to just recast somebody if it was somebody at all important. So, because they've already recast a couple of actors.
Dario, don't even get me started on Dario.
Oh, Dario, yeah. Well, and the Mountain is also, he got recast twice.
Three. Yeah, third. No, this is the third mountain.
Oh, the third
right,
one.
So he got
this is the third
twice.
mountain.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
recast twice.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, two changes. So, or three. Well, three different people. Yeah.
And this is like the most cuddly looking mountain yet. His face is so round and cute.
Yeah.
He did not look scary.
Actually,
but...
I was gonna ask you guys who know the books better. Like when with that battle between the Mountain and Oberyn, does his head explode like that in the book? I didn't remember that, but obviously watching it is so much more visceral and shocking to see.
In the book, the Mountain says, then I smashed her fucking head in like this. He draws back his gauntleted fist, and Martin writes something like, in the cool dawn air, like his fist seemed to smoke because, there's blood on the fist. And then there came a sickening crunch. So basically he didn't even squeeze. He just smashed his face in with one fist. Mm-hmm. So it would.
Yeah, I think it was much
minor
more
details.
Visceral on the show. That was truly terrible and that was very sad.
That was kind of crazy. I kind of wondered about the realities of it though. Like, could you actually, even if you were the Mountain, could you actually squeeze a dude's head and make it explode like that? I was very curious, but I didn't come to any conclusions. I didn't see.
Where's Mythbusters when you need them?
I know, seriously. Let's get some busters on the street and let's just get the Mountain himself. Get that actor. Get him to squeeze a bunch of heads. See what happens.
I think there was actually an article about this online, but I don't think I read it, so I don't know what the conclusion was.
Dang it.
Sorry.
That made watching season 4 very hard for me too. Like, because I felt like it was all kind of downhill after Joffrey's wedding, because then now all I had to look forward to was, Oberon. He's like one of my favorite characters, and it was so great to see finally, as heteronormative female. I just, I feel like they keep killing off all the really hot men. Every year, the cast of hot men on the show gets smaller and smaller. It started with Khal Drogo and then Rob. I like Dario, like the original Dario. I thought he was fine. He looked appropriately smug and douchey enough, like how I pictured him in the book. Like he didn't need that blue beard and all that. The guy they have now just looks like I think I see guys who look like that in like Bushwick all the time. Like that is not Dario. That is just some lame generic hipster.
No, that dude
knight.
looks like he
Even
belongs in True Blood or something.
Yeah, he doesn't even his look. He looks like he comes from Westeros. He doesn't look like a second son. He doesn't have any swagger. He doesn't have the costume right. So Oberyn was like it for me. There's like no one else unless they cast Viggo Mortensen as like damp hair or something. Like there is nothing left for me. So I was so sad to see Oberyn go because he was absolutely perfect. I watched the season premiere at Barclays Center, 4,000 ticket seats to watch the premiere early on a big screen for a charity event.
Oh, wow.
When Pedro Pascal came on screen, you just heard like 2,500 women go all at the same time and just gasp, like, because he was so perfect. And just knowing what was going to happen to him, man, that made season 4 really hard.
All right. Well, like when in the intro, I mentioned that Anthony was saying like, oh, well, what can we guess about the way that the story is going to go based on what they've chosen to do in the show? So, like Doug, like what the F was up with that? The others turning the baby into a White Walker, and what is that? Is that going to play out the same way in the books, do you think, or is it going to be slightly different? Or
I really have no idea, and because it's something that was dropped by the show, I've intentionally been not thinking about it. It's like I don't mind if someone points out like a little nugget from the book where it's like, oh yeah, that escaped me the first time. So what does that mean? Okay, that's cool. And you start thinking about it, and I feel that's fine because it was already there the first time. And Martin's books are like an onion. You go back, you read it again, you reveal new layers.
And you cry.
And well, and maybe you cry. But from the show, I felt like it was cheapened. It felt wrong to me. So I've been intentionally avoiding. What does this mean? I want to know from the books what this stuff means.
I think you're thinking about it too much.
No, that's the whole point. I haven't been.
No, but Doug, you said on your blog, there are like 12 shadowy shapes in the background, and
oh well, yeah, just like when that sorcerer, like the one that looks like Darth Maul, but like all white, changes the baby. He walks forward, and I noticed that there were 12 shadowy figures in the background. So that means it's a total, including the one that changed the baby, of 13. And, traditionally that's like, a number that's associated with like a witch's coven or something. So maybe there's some kind of coven of 13. But, after like I blogged about it, I just kind of put it out of my head.
But there was also the thing where they accidentally released a synopsis that called that guy the Night King.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I heard about that. I was upset to have heard about it.
When Doug kept saying the White Walker changed the baby, I kept imagining like a White Walker actually changing a baby's diaper.
That's the big plot twist.
Yeah.
I don't know. I took that scene as something different. I took it as, all right, we haven't shown the others in a while. The season's starting to lag a little bit. I felt like we knew the others were taking Craster's sons away and turning them into more others. You'd have to kind of figure that, if the White Walkers are coming to attack the South, then yeah, they have a social hierarchy. They have a structure. Just the teeny little glimpse as a reminder of why Craster's tradition is so horrible. I felt like you're reading too much into it. Now, okay, yeah, they called that guy the Night's King. That is unusual, but I don't think it was that big a deal.
Well, I mean, I guess it's, to each their own. And you
Yeah.
could be right. It could just be something that's completely different, in which case, hey, no harm done. But that was my whole point from earlier, is I don't know if it's completely different. And if is something that's right out of the books, when I hit that moment in the book, it's not going to have the same impact that I want it to have. I mean, these are my favorite books ever. And with all due respect to all the incredible authors that I've read over the years, there isn't a close second for me. So I don't want to get this story secondhand, which is how I view the HBO series, as much as I like it.
Does anyone have any new theory? Like, since the last time we talked about this, which was when Dance with Dragons came out, does anyone have any new theories about what the others are, or like the prophecies, the dragons, three heads, all that kind of stuff?
Not me. I don't remember all the books and stuff all well enough. Like, I certainly am a total amateur compared to you guys. So,
okay, well, I'll just say I read actually one of Theresa's last review, and I was just reading through all the comments on it. And somebody had this theory I thought was good. I'd never heard this before, but they said, my theory is that the walkers are corrupted children who did this to themselves in an attempt to combat the first men, creating the imbalance that led to the birth of dragons.
That's a pretty good theory.
Yeah, that's a good theory.
Should have had that guy on the show.
I'll go back and look for him. No, I think that's a good theory. I'm still holding out for what I enjoy about reading the series and watching the show. It's more the characters and how they react to things like the history, the magic, the dragons, the others around them. So for me, it's like I always wonder, like, all right, even after Jon Snow's death, like, how are they going to bring him back? Because he has to be the ice part of the Song of Ice and Fire. Like, I'm still holding out that him and Dany will come together. On that.
I have a theory on Jon Snow if you want to hear it.
Yes.
Should I? I'm pretty sure that just based on all the clues they've dropped, that Jon Snow is going to be Azor Ahai reborn. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I remember there was one point in the 5th book, and I think that kind of cinched it for me. Melisandre is like trying to find Stannis, and who she still thinks is Azor Ahai reborn. And she says something like, you know, I keep trying to find Stannis, and all the Lord of Light shows me is snow. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and at that point I was like, ding, 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 ding. Like, I was already pretty sure, but, you know, I've heard some people think that maybe Azor Ahai reborn is Daenerys. And if it's not Jon, I'm sure it is Dany, but my money is on Jon, especially since he's pretty much bleeding to death now in the snow. You need a way to bring him back, so this was already in place.
Okay, actually, speaking of that, Doug, another person posted a comment on Theresa's thing to this Reddit thread with a crazy theory that okay, so like, really stop listening if you don't want highly speculative spoiler type theories, right? But you know, there's this popular fan theory that Jon is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. And so, like, at some point, maybe he's going to need some evidence of that, something to establish his
parentage.
His bloodline, whatever. And so this theory is that Rhaegar's harp is hidden in the crypts of Winterfell. And there's actually some fairly interesting evidence to that effect, along with maybe the, you know, like in Westeros, they swap cloaks when you get married. Mm-hmm. And so along with maybe the cloak proving that Rhaegar and Lyanna were married, which would establish both who Jon's parents were and that he was born legitimately and is not a bastard as previously thought. Okay, and then just another thing I want to mention is that I've been convinced since the beginning that the whites, the animated corpses, were all being controlled, probably by some Blood Raven type warg, you know, evil other warg, right? Because if you read George's old science fiction short stories, he has this whole series of stories that were collected in a book called Songs the Dead Men Sing, where there's this technology in the future that allows you to control multiple zombie bodies at once and use them for manual labor. And if you've read all of George's previous work and then you read Song of Ice and Fire, you see how he took all these ideas from all his previous work and kind of stuck them together. So I've been convinced that that's been going on this whole time. And I think that received support in the show when the skeletons try to run into the tree where Blood Raven is, and they fall apart, and Jojen says the power that controls them has no reach here, or something like that. And I think that pretty clearly indicates that I was right.
I hated those skeletons, by the way. It felt so Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, I hated the fireball. That reminded me of
That too.
That scene. No, it was right. It was right out of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where there's the wizard like throwing the fireballs. That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, between that with the little Pirates of the Caribbean thrown in, yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of that. I mean, now I'm curious to see what Bran is going to do all next season. He'll just be chilling underneath the snow in his cave, having visions.
No, see, they're going to diverge from the. I predict they're going to diverge from the books totally, and all sorts of crazy made-up shit is going to happen to Bran and Arya and those kinds of characters.
Oh, really?
You heard it here first.
Well, there's plenty of real shit for Arya to do, though. No, I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I know she doesn't. It doesn't happen. I guess it mostly doesn't happen until book 5, right? But it doesn't really matter to the show.
Yeah, but it's all like training stuff. They're not going to spend the whole season of her or Bran just training. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, no, you're right. I just can't wait to see Arya actually go do all the stuff with the Faceless Men and all that. So.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. I guess I wouldn't be surprised though if they did make a lot of the season like a season-long training montage for the Stark kids. Because I feel like in Marine this year, they were Dany didn't really do very much. She sat council a few times. You know, at the very beginning, she crucified some masters. She met the man who, you know, she'll eventually, you know, spoiler, you know, get married to. But I felt like Marine was just like wheels spinning. Like they really dragged that out of it until they got to the end. Like her big moment at the end was learning that Drogon, you know, had killed a child. When in the books, there was so much other stuff going on in Marine with the Sons of the Harpy, the Plague, you know, just more intrigue, you know. So I think they'll have to step that up for next year and lead to her big moment being, you know, getting reunited with Drogon again.
I have to say though, Teresa, I did really like where she locks her dragons away in that.
That was heartbreaking.
Whatever, yeah, it was like the cinematography was gorgeous, and just emotionally, it was really moving, and I really thought it was effective.
Oh, I agree. I thought the actor who played the shepherd he just brought a tear to my eye. The way he sold his grief so well, just that was really sad. And I watched it with you know, some people who hadn't seen it before. And we're just like, oh no, oh God, why is he crying? Oh my God. You know, like the big shock of that, you know, that actor was great. And that was such a good moment for Dany. I just wish she had more to do like earlier in the season. It was kind of like all she did was exile Ser Jorah from the friend zone.
And braid her handmaiden's hair.
Yeah.
They had a long conversation about her relationship status.
That's true. I mean, I'm kind of curious to see that Grey Worm.
Yeah.
Grey Worm and Missandei. You know, there'll be like the little couple to root for. You know, her handmaiden's always got to have a little side romance going on, just like her Khalasar girl did.
Oh yeah, right.
I actually found it kind of ironic that, you know, she was taking the time to braid her servant's hair and, you know, gossip about Grey Worm the week after she was dealing with 212 supplicants. And it's like, you know, when is it ever going to end? But it's like, oh, okay, but now I'll braid your hair.
Everyone's got to relax. You don't understand how women work. Sometimes you just need to blow off some steam and talk about stupid shit.
Doug, this was a metaphor for George and his writing. It's like that's why he does these other projects. He has to take a little break now and then. That's why he has to watch football. He can't just write Song of Ice and Fire all the time.
I know, that's why he has to be on John Oliver's show and Jimmy Kimmel's show. Like, I gotta say, I know he's not my bitch, but I'm getting a little annoyed with seeing him on late night TV like this whole summer. What are you doing?
Well, I mean, he was on John Oliver for like 30 seconds.
I don't care. That's 30 seconds.
Remotely.
And he was sitting at his keyboard typing as he was doing it.
Yeah,
he was just doing it for show. I tried looking at screen cap.
Yeah, did anybody zoom in?
It was like his fantasy football pool.
Ah.
I actually heard someone. I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody told me that John Scalzi at some point posted a thing saying that he actually like calculated at some point that George R. R. Martin actually writes as fast as he does. It's just that he writes, John Scalzi writes like 100,000 word books and has them come out every year, and George writes like, I don't even know, 400,000 words books and has them come out every like 4 or 5 years. And actually, George is actually a fairly, productive writer. It's just that the books are so gigantic that it just seems like he, is just always doing something besides writing.
I think that's fair. And he's written a bunch of novellas, even between Dance with Dragons and now. He's written like at least 2 pretty long novellas. So he's definitely writing other things. I mean, I don't envy him that job at all. That's got to be the pressure. Sounds like it's really mounting. He knows the show is going to bypass the books. And, like I said, I agree with John. Like, the books are something separate. It's a solo experience. I watched the show for different reasons. I mean, I was glad I had read all the books before I saw a first episode of the show. I mean, I had figured they had cast Sean Bean, so Ned was going to die at some point. Wasn't expecting quite as soon, but I was kind of like, all right, well, but here's the book, and here's one experience, and now I get to watch something else and experience it in a different way.
I would have to say I'm maybe a little bit envious of George R. R. Martin. I mean, maybe just a little bit. But actually, speaking of him on John Oliver, like how surreal. I mean, I don't know, maybe just I think for those of us like Doug and me who have been read these books like 15 years ago, to have George suddenly on Conan O'Brien all the time and stuff, and it's really surreal. I mean, there's a news program I watch called The Young Turks. It's the most popular online news show, and like every day there's some sort of Red Wedding reference, like whenever just talking about the news or something, it's like, Jamie Lannister sends his regards, stab, and it's just so weird to have this thing that was so obscure for so long, or like limited to such as like, limited to like just my crowd, suddenly like known and being referenced on, in the news just every, on a daily basis.
As cool as it is to see it like become so mainstream, it does kind of bug me a little bit that like the references like the Red Wedding get dropped all the time now, because it's such a great moment to experience without knowing what it is, and like at this point it's almost impossible to not know what it is before you actually read it or watch it, and that's just such a bummer, because it's like, I don't know, like I have like vicarious feelings for people who haven't been spoiled for things, like I try to protect other people from being spoiled, and like I get upset when other people get things ruined for them, and so it kind of pains me a little bit to watch that happening, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, there's a statute of limitations on some of the spoilers. I agree, though. I mean, when I got spoiled for those 2 books, I was really upset. I was angry. I was really upset. I don't like to spoil things for other people either. I agree. Just sometimes some things become so big that you can't help but you can't avoid them.
Yeah.
Well, if it turns out that, I said before that I'm not going to be watching an episode when it comes out anymore. First, I had to check on Facebook and say, hey, can I watch it? And if it turns out that we hit that point where I can't watch him anymore, I'm going to have to do my best to avoid spoilers, which, based on this conversation, it's a conclusion I already came to long ago. It's not going to be easy, but a couple of things that I'm immediately going to do is Sunday night until Monday night, that's social media blackout time, because that's when people are going to be tweeting, Facebooking, linking about Game of Thrones more than any other time. So, if you're like me, do your social media blackout for like 24 hours from the end of Game of Thrones, and you'll at least get past the first wave. Then you have to be vigilant.
But that's just a probing attack. That's just that they're just testing your strength, Doug.
And I'm fine with that because my resolve is strong. And, the second I can't follow the show anymore, that means I also immediately stop following, HBO's Game of Thrones on Facebook, Twitter. You just pull back, you hold the line. And, it's just basically those 10 weeks each season. Basically, my radar will have to be up every time I'm online, every time I'm at a convention. And thankfully, like my friends, they all know how fanatical I am about not getting spoiled about Game of Thrones. So most of them will be cool. Although, Justin, I have my eye on you if our hands cross.
Okay, so Doug, if given the, I mean, this obviously isn't going to happen, but if HBO came to you and said, Doug, would you like us to cancel the show right now so that you won't be spoiled for the books going forward? What would your decision be?
I think my brain just shut down when you asked me the question, Dave. It just did not compute. But no, I would say go ahead and do your show. I'll manage on my own because I don't want to take that much joy away from that many people.
You know what, HBO? You do nice work. Continue making your little show. I'll manage, right?
Just don't get
something-
David Milch to do the end of it. No David Milch, no Damon Lindelof, Carlton Hughes. No. That's all. Those are my only stipulations. You cannot get those guys to finish.
We were talking before we started recording about how like horribly ironic it would be. Okay, so a while back, George said that he didn't want to quote unquote pull a Lost with Song of Ice and Fire, and so we were saying, like, knowing Hollywood, maybe they'll hire Damon Lindelof to come in and write the ending, or like write the last season for a Game of Thrones TV show, and just like have it make no sense whatsoever, like he did with Lost. So that's what Theresa was referring to there.
Yeah, Lindelof's too busy with his own show now. Like, let's keep him distracted. Let's keep him.
yeah. Everyone watch The Leftovers, so he doesn't. So they keep doing it. So he stays contained to that one.
Yeah, like even if it just means like putting your TV on the channel and not watching it, like even if you have it muted, it's just like have it on so it has the best ratings ever. So that way he'll be occupied for years. He won't be able to write anything. And that'll just be the show. That'll be our Omelas. That'll be the show we cast all of our sin on.
So, Dave, what about you? If it turns out that the show, passes the books,
right?
What are you going to do to avoid spoilers? Because I think you're in the same camp as me, where you're pretty much of the opinion, no, I can't keep watching this anymore.
Well, I don't know. That'll be really hard because, like, do I want to wait 10 years to find out how the story ends, or I don't know.
I'll wait.
I mean, but I will say, Doug, if I had the choice to cancel the show, I would totally do it. That would be ideal. That would be ideal from my point. That would be ideal from my point of view. They've already done all the like stuff I really wanted to see, right? The Red Wedding and everything, and it's made the books really popular. And if the show were to just end now, then all the people would have no choice but to read the books going forward, and I would just consider that a big win all around.
Well, now, if they came to me with this...
George should say yes to that. I mean, shit, that would be the best thing for him.
Well, now, if they came to me with this question, Dave, like to return to it, would it get out that I was responsible for the cancellation of Game of Thrones? Or would that, that would be top secret information? Because then I might revise my answer.
Yeah, no, okay. Say for the sake of argument that it's completely anonymous.
Oh, okay.
You were like Littlefinger behind the scenes, ruining everybody's good time.
So if it wasn't secret, what would happen is that that Doug would get invited somewhere, and then like somebody would slip up behind him and say, "The Nielsen send their regards," and then stab.
Actually,
and then you notice like some shitty indie band playing in the wings. Oh God, no! It's Imagine Dragons. No.
Actually, I'll say this: even if it could be anonymous, I still wouldn't cancel it, and I'll tell you why. Because by the seven forbid, if George should pass away before he finishes the books, at least there'll be some kind of closure with the HBO series.
That's a good point, but I mean, like, this is all completely unrealistic, but my ideal situation would be they stop doing the show, we see how it goes with the books, and if there's some problem with the books not getting done, they would just come back and like shoot the end of the last 3 seasons. They could just recast it at that point. I don't care.
Actually, if you want to get ideal, just have them film all the episodes and just in advance, film everything and only release them as new books come out. Although people would riot, but that way, you still get the show, you still get the books, and the book people stay happy because they're not getting spoiled. And well, I guess the viewers they're upset because it's like the episodes are there, but why can't we watch them?
Yeah, I'd be furious. I'm still waiting for my Deadwood movie that I know will never, ever come.
Never happen.
That's never going to happen.
Which is too bad.
Okay, but speaking of movies, there was some speculation that they might do the end of the Game of Thrones as a series of feature films. I don't know if anyone saw that. And it sounded like George was actually fairly receptive to that idea. Sounded like the HBO executives were not. But I don't know. What do you guys think of that idea?
I think like Deadwood, it's too hard to get actors' contracts together. It's well, they are making an Entourage movie, right? I feel like I've seen an advertisement or something for the Entourage movie.
Yeah,
so Game of Thrones would definitely do a lot better than that. But I think anytime you stop a production and then start it up again as a movie, it becomes a whole different ball game of licensing and contracts. I think there's like a lot of logistics to it that might be too hard. So I don't know that I would even like that. Just let it end as a TV show. Yeah, my Deadwood movie would have been awesome in my head. But, now the show just remains as it is, like always evergreen and in my memories. And that's fine. That's TV. That's life. It happens.
To me, movies are not greater than television, like by default, by any means. And so, like, if something's great as a TV show, I don't want it to, like, quote unquote, graduate to a movie. I would rather it finish as a TV show. And also, the sprawling nature of Game of Thrones, I don't think would really translate all that well to feature film adaptation. I mean, even if you took one book, or like, I don't know how much plot line they're talking about doing this for, but even if you just took like half of a book, like how many movies would that take up? I mean, it takes up 10 hours on television till like one book, or in the case of season 3 and 4, half of a book. So
okay, you're right. But John, okay, we imagine at some point though, there's going to be this massive battle of dragons versus ice zombies, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, what if they just released a feature film that was just basically that battle with like a $200 million budget? That would be pretty freaking awesome, in my opinion.
And that would tear my heart. That would tear my heart out, because here I am saying I'm not watching the show until the books are out, and now that means that you have this ridiculous battle on the big screen, and I can't watch it. I think I'd go crazy trying to decide whether I should watch the HBO series so I could see the movie or not. So I am hoping that the movie never, ever happens in a billion years, because that's like the worst case scenario for me.
Well, no, I think the worst case scenario, I just read today an interview with George where he had thrown in an example of, they had asked him about, the books are not catching up to the show fast enough. He's like, well, on Spartacus, they stopped everything to do a prequel season. I'm like, oh, God, that's the worst case scenario. We stop everything right now and go to Dunk and Egg stories, which are cool. They're great. But we have a season of Dunk and Egg, and then we'll get back to the main storyline. I think that would be the worst case scenario.
I'd be much happier with that.
I would be totally cool with that.
This is the divide between purists and people who say, I don't mind, watching the show before the book, before stuff happens in the books. It's just two different mindsets, and neither person is wrong. It's just a matter of priorities.
Well, wait, Doug, I would be totally cool with what Theresa just described, a Dunk and Egg season. I'd be on board with that.
That's great. I think, though, they should still, film the HBO season, though, because you have the kids growing up.
Yeah.
So they would have to lay out a lot of money in advance, but they make it up hand over fist, and they know it. So they shouldn't hesitate to do it, is my opinion. But,
it would just be like one really big flashback,
But I don't think Benioff and Weiss have any interest in taking a season off.
Well, maybe they could get Damon Lindelof to write that season.
Oh, God.
Yeah, Spartacus, that was done under duress. That was a different set of circumstances. But yeah, I don't know. Like, part of me is like, well, maybe that could work. But I don't know. I just want the show to keep going ahead while it can. And I like it when the show adds new scenes that weren't in the books. We get Ross and Shay talking to each other. We get more Littlefinger and Varys together. Now we'd get more asides with maybe Dany.
I don't mind when they add new things, as long as they make sense, because there have been a few times where they added new things, and when you take a step back and you stop and you think about it and you break it down, it doesn't make a lick of sense. Like we were talking before about that scene up in Craster's Keep with Bran, and then John comes later on, and it's like, okay, so they're keeping Ghost in this cage, and they're talking about how we can't keep everyone alive because food is scarce, but meanwhile we're gonna feed all this food to Ghost in the cage, who probably consumes more than any human. Just things like that really annoy me. It's like, have some basic logic to these scenes if you're going to include them. And there were some other logic doozies just in that whole additional piece that just drove me crazy. That was probably the part of season 4 that I hated the most, is everything they put there. Even though I understood why they had to do it, because they needed some filler for Bran because his story's almost done in the books that's been published to date. But that was awful on so many levels.
Yeah, I thought there were a lot, like in season 2, all the stuff they added, I hated basically, but I think they've gotten better. Like, the stuff they added in seasons 3 and 4, I think maybe they're getting better at it. They're getting, they've lived with these characters long enough. They're getting a little bit better sense of it, and they gave me a little bit more hope that if they wildly diverge from the books going forward, it might not be a total clusterfuck. Although I'm very apprehensive, nevertheless.
Well, I thought this season was interesting that Sansa, outed herself to the people in the Vale. That didn't happen in the books. And I thought that was really cool. Like, whoa, wait a second.
I wanted to mention that. Yeah, I actually thought that was an improvement over the book, to be honest with you.
Agreed.
The way that the sort of like investigation into Lysa Arryn's death was handled.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I had a problem with for that scene was Peter Baelish is, in the books, he's always this dude that's 10 steps ahead of everyone. Whereas in the show, he pushed Lysa out, and the way they portrayed everything in the following episode, he was pinning his hopes. Like, it wasn't even that he was pinning his hopes on Sansa, because he didn't even have a chance to talk to her. He was helpless. And Peter Baelish is not the kind of character that puts himself in a helpless situation he can help.
See, Doug, the way I interpreted that scene was like he knew that she was going to back him up, right? Like they have a moment there, and I felt like when he pushed Lysa out the window, he knew Sansa was going to back him up on that one.
I mean, that's a fair argument, but at the same time, right before they brought Sansa in and she gave her spin on the story, he said, let me go get her. And they were like quick to prevent that from happening because they didn't want him talking to her, which is precisely what he would have done in my mind had he had that chance.
Well, that may have also been a bit of theater for them to make it seem like, like to give more credence to her story because she's going to back him even though he didn't get a chance to talk to her,
It's entirely possible. It's just, it depends on how you want to interpret the scene.
Yeah.
That was one thing where I thought that you could raise a question about the motivations. But I mean, if that's your interpretation, then yeah, it works perfectly.
I mean, admittedly, it's us all giving Baelish a lot of credit. But, I think he kind of deserves it, because
I think he totally deserves it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I like best about the show is how much it highlights how Baelish and Varys are like probably the two people who are playing the Game of Thrones the hardest. Whereas in the books, like, it's easy to sort of overlook them. I mean, unless like you're, hardcore fans like you and Dave, and maybe Theresa, because it's like they're not point of view characters and they're just characters that people are talking to and you only see them now and then. But on the show, in the books, they cast this large shadow, but like in the show, they they're much more in your face, and it's much more clear that they're they're really pulling all the strings.
And I also thought that the way that plays out with Sansa makes it very clear. I mean, I had no doubt about this anyway, but that she's going to be the next generation of player in the Game of Thrones, right? She's going to be the next Littlefinger or something.
Oh, totally.
Right.
I hope so. When she showed up at the end with the, she looked like Mia Sara in Legend after she had gotten with the Prince of Darkness and like her black dress and everything so severe. I'm like, yep, she's growing up now. She's not like the little songbird dreaming about nights. Like she knows. So I'm excited for that. And I'm excited to see where they go. will Littlefinger be bringing her around to the other Lords of the Vale? Like, what's going to happen more long term? Will we get more fleshed out scenes with Sansa coming into her own?
All right, cool. So we're at
90 minutes.
At 90 minutes. Yeah, so we should probably start wrapping this up. I don't know, final thoughts, predictions. As I said, I'm predicting show has nothing to do with the books going forward, and there will be about 8 or 9 books, and they won't be done for at least 10 years, 10 to 15 years. That's my prediction. I'm on the record. Anyone else care to hazard a?
Okay, I'm gonna go books, 7 or 8 books. The show, they realize, wow, we thought we could keep it to 7 seasons. Turns out it's gonna be 8, just like with George, where he originally thought it was a trilogy and it just kept growing. I think the same thing's gonna happen to the show, and it won't even be padding. They'll just have to do an extra season. The story was bigger than they realized, and I think we will get those Greyjoys, but I think they're gonna hold off introducing the additional Greyjoy brothers until season 6, and they're just going to focus a lot on Dorne in season 5, and they might cut Aaron Greyjoy, because so far in the books, he hasn't done anything that's so essential that he can't be cut from the show. That could change later, but if they can find a way to cut Aaron Greyjoy, I say he's gone from the show.
All right, I think that we will see most of the Greyjoys in the next season. We'll see the King's Moot. I think we'll at least end with the King's Moot. Balin Greyjoy has to die at this point. I don't think we'll see the Sand Snakes. I don't know that we'll get an update on Myrcella and Dorne. I think the next book I'm going to predict July 2016. I could definitely be wrong. I'm just going to hazard a guess. If I was working for his publisher, I'd want it to come out around the time of summer conventions. I think the book series will probably end up being 9 books. It's just going to keep spiraling and getting bigger and bigger. We've still got a long way to go and a lot of loose threads.
Okay, and John?
Well, I'm the amateur here. I'll leave the predictions to professionals like you guys.
I predict Viggo Mortensen for season 5. That's what I'm hoping. Someone get on that.
All right, cool. So I think we're going to wrap things up there. So before we say goodbye, John has a new book out, Help Fund My Robot Army. You want to just tell us a bit about that, John?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's the full title is Help Fund My Robot Army and Other Improbable Crowdfunding Projects. And so it's an anthology in the form of fictional Kickstarter projects. So it uses like project goals and rewards and updates and user comments to tell the story. But I was going to say, when we were talking about spoilers earlier, actually one of the Kickstarter projects in the book is a device called Spoiler Free. And so it's something that protects you from spoilers on the internet by like selectively erasing your memory. And, as you might imagine, it doesn't quite, go all according to plan, but otherwise there would be no story. But yeah, so that's just one of them. And then there's other ones that you can help fund a wildlife preserve for like paranormal creatures. And there's a couple of that actually do deal with robots. So the title isn't completely misleading. But yeah, that's out now, and you can get it at Amazon and, check it out.
Oh my God, we need like a real app that will protect us from Game of Thrones spoilers. That thing would go crazy. That people would buy that, like book fans, they would buy that and put it on their computers and their phones. I would.
Yeah. All right, get on that, software developers. All right, cool. So yeah, but we really need to wrap this up there. So thanks, guys, so much for joining us. This was great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Thanks, dude.
And that was our panel. So thanks again to John Just Fathoms, Doug Cohen, and Theresa DelGucci for joining us as guest geeks. And of course, big thanks again to Ty Frank for being our guest today. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Christopher Beck in the US and Antic Gamer in Mexico. And of course, a very special thank you to all of our crowdfunders, including Christopher Brown, Bruno Onkir, Daniel Eel, and Donato Cabal, who all just made $50 contributions to the show. I'd also really like to thank R. Chris 4 and John Marshall for signing up as monthly crowdfunders. This episode was also made possible thanks to contributions from Raymond Chan, Jonathan Pottle, Kurt Donaldson, and Scott Osterling. So thanks guys, we really appreciate it. To learn more, visit us at geeksguideshow.com and click on crowdfunding. And if you're looking for more podcasts to listen to, check out SF Signal's list of the best podcast fiction of all time. David Stephan lists his 50 favorite short stories that are available as free podcasts, including my stories They Go Bump and Red Road, which appears number 11 and number 34 on the list. To find the post, just Google SF Signal Best Podcast Fiction. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.